Hello everyone, I'm the DreamTeller and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The first whisper was so faint, I thought it was just the wind. But as the shadows lengthened and the forest grew darker, I realized with mounting horror that I was hearing voices, and they were getting closer. It was supposed to be a simple day hike. I'd done this trail a dozen times before, always making it back to my car well before sunset. But today, something was different. Maybe it was the unseasonably warm weather that had me dawdling, stopping to admire wildflowers I'd never noticed before. Or maybe it was that nagging feeling I'd had all day, like I was being watched. Whatever the reason, by the time I realized I'd strayed from the main path, the sun was already dipping below the tree line. I tried retracing my steps, but in the fading light, every tree looked the same. The dense canopy overhead blocked out what little remaining daylight there was, plunging the forest into an eerie twilight. I fumbled for my phone, cursing under my breath when I saw there was no signal. The battery was low, too. I'd been using it to take photos all day, not thinking I'd need it for anything else. I switched on the flashlight feature, wincing at how quickly the battery percentage dropped. That's when I heard it, a whisper, so soft I almost missed it. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet forest. No response. I started walking faster, my eyes darting left and right, searching for any sign of the trail. The beam of my phone's flashlight seemed pitiful against the encroaching darkness. Branches snagged at my clothes, and more than once I tripped over hidden roots. The whispers came again, louder this time. I couldn't make out words, but the sound sent chills down my spine. It seemed to be coming from all around me, as if the trees themselves were talking. "Is someone there?" I shouted, hating how my voice cracked. Part of me hoped for an answer. At least then I'd know I wasn't alone out here. But the larger part of me dreaded a response. I broke into a jog, then a run. Branches whipped at my face, leaving stinging scratches, but I didn't slow down. The whispers were getting louder, more insistent. I still couldn't understand what they were saying, but the tone was unmistakable. Hungry, eager, closing in. My foot caught on something, a root or a rock, I couldn't tell, and I went down hard. My phone flew from my hand, its light flickering out as it hit the forest floor. For a moment, I lay there, the breath knocked out of me, surrounded by absolute darkness. The whispers stopped, slowly, painfully. I pushed myself to my knees. My hands groped blindly in the leaf litter, searching for my phone. I found it, but the screen remained dark no matter how many times I pressed the power button. The battery must have died in the fall. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I became aware of movement around me. Shadows within shadows, darker than the night itself, seemed to shift and flow. And then the whispers started again, so close now I could feel the breath on my ear. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain in my scraped palms and bruised knees. I ran blindly, branches and thorns tearing at my clothes and skin. The whispers followed, growing in volume until they were a cacophony of hissing voices, wordless yet full of malice. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that dark, twisted forest. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but still I pushed on. Because whatever was behind me, whatever was whispering in the darkness, was far worse than any physical pain. Just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, when my legs were about to give out and my heart felt like it would burst from my chest, I saw a light ahead. Faint at first, then growing brighter. A clearing in the trees, lit by the rising moon. With a final burst of energy I didn't know I possessed, I sprinted toward the light. The whispers rose to a fever pitch, angry now, desperate. I felt something brush against my back, icy cold fingers trying to grab hold, but I jerked away and kept running. I burst out of the tree line into a small meadow. The sudden moonlight was almost blinding after the pitch darkness of the forest. I collapsed onto the grass, gulping in great lungfuls of air. For a long moment, all I could hear was the sound of my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. Then, slowly, I became aware of the normal nighttime sounds: crickets chirping, an owl hooting in the distance. The whispers were gone. I rolled onto my back, looking up at the star-filled sky. Never had I been so glad to see the moon and stars. As my breathing slowed and my pulse returned to something approaching normal, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Had it all been in my head? Some kind of panic-induced hallucination brought on by getting lost in the dark? But no. The scratches on my arms and face were real enough, as was the tear in my jacket where something had grabbed at me. I sat up slowly, wincing at my various aches and pains. The meadow was small, maybe 50 feet across, surrounded on all sides by dense forest. In the moonlight, the trees looked perfectly ordinary. There was no sign of the shifting shadows I'd seen, no hint of the malevolent presence I'd felt pursuing me. But I knew better than to trust appearances. Whatever was out there in the darkness, it was real. And it was waiting. I got to my feet, brushing grass and leaves from my clothes. I had no idea where I was or how far I'd run from the trail. My phone was dead, I had no food or water, and the temperature was dropping rapidly now that night had fallen. I was in serious trouble, but I was alive, and as long as I stayed in this moonlit clearing, I was safe. I hoped. I spent the night pacing the perimeter of the meadow, too afraid to sit still, let alone try to sleep. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves had me spinning around, heart in my throat. But nothing emerged from the darkness. As the eastern sky began to lighten with the approaching dawn, I allowed myself to relax slightly. I'd made it through the night. Soon it would be light enough to try and find my way back to civilization. But as I turned to watch the sun rise, movement at the edge of the meadow caught my eye. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. There, just inside the tree line, was a figure, humanoid in shape, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at odd angles. As I watched, paralyzed with fear, it took a step forward into the meadow. The moment its foot touched the grass, the first rays of sunlight crested the horizon. The figure let out a silent scream, its body seeming to dissolve into wisps of shadow that were quickly burned away by the growing light. Within seconds, it was gone. The meadow was empty save for myself and the cheerful sounds of birds greeting the new day. I didn't wait around to see if there were more of whatever that thing was. As soon as I could see clearly, I picked a direction and started walking. It took hours of trudging through the woods, but eventually I heard the blessed sound of traffic. I emerged from the forest onto the shoulder of a highway. A passing trucker was kind enough to stop and give me a ride to the nearest town, where I was able to contact my family and let them know I was okay. I told the police I'd gotten lost while hiking and spent the night in the woods. It was easier than trying to explain what had really happened. Who would believe me anyway? But I know what I saw, what I heard, what chased me through that dark forest. And I know that it's still out there, waiting in the shadows between the trees. I won't be going hiking again anytime soon. At least, not alone. And never, ever after dark. Because now I know that when night falls in the forest, it's not just shadows and animals that come out to hunt. There are older, darker things that lurk in the spaces between the trees. Things that whisper in voices almost, but not quite, human. And if you listen closely on a quiet night, you might hear them too. But trust me, you don't want to. Because once you hear those whispers, once you know they're out there, you'll never feel safe in the dark again. I know I don't. Every night as I lay in bed, I find myself straining to hear, dreading the moment when the normal sounds of the night are replaced by those familiar, terrible whispers. So far, they haven't found me here in the city. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I could swear I hear something. A faint, distant voice calling my name. And I wonder how long it will be before the shadows come for me again. The moment I saw his eyes in the rearview mirror, I knew we'd made a terrible mistake. There was something off about them, a wild, unhinged look that sent a chill down my spine. But by then, it was too late. We were already speeding down a dirt road into the darkness, with nothing but desert stretching out around us. It had started as a dream vacation. Sarah and I had been planning this road trip through the Southwest for months. We'd saved up, mapped out our route, and packed our little hatchback to the brim with camping gear and snacks. The first few days had been amazing, breathtaking vistas, quirky roadside attractions, and starry nights spent cuddling by the campfire. But then, on the fourth day, our car started making a worrying rattling noise. We tried to ignore it at first, but it kept getting worse. By the time we were halfway between nowhere and not much else, smoke was pouring from under the hood. "Shit," I muttered, pulling over to the side of the empty highway. Sarah gave me a worried look as I popped the hood, coughing as a cloud of acrid smoke billowed out. I'm no mechanic, but even I could tell this was bad. Something had overheated and melted, leaving a mess of plastic and metal gunk where important engine parts should be. We weren't going anywhere in this car. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with anxiety. I pulled out my phone, already knowing what I'd see. No signal. We were well and truly stranded. That's when we saw the truck approaching. It was an old pickup, more rust than paint, kicking up a cloud of dust as it rumbled down the highway. We waved frantically, and to our relief, it slowed to a stop beside us. The driver leaned out the window. He was a wiry man, probably in his 50s, with leathery skin and a patchy gray beard. "You folks having some trouble?" he asked, his voice gravelly. We explained our situation, and he nodded sympathetically. "That's a real shame. Nearest town's about 60 miles that-a-way," he said, gesturing down the road. "I can give you a ride if you want." Was heading that direction anyway. Sarah and I exchanged glances. We didn't have many options, but getting into a stranger's car in the middle of nowhere wasn't exactly safe. But what choice did we have? "That would be great, thank you," I said finally. "I'm Jack, and this is my wife, Sarah." The man introduced himself as Earl and helped us grab our most important belongings from our dead car. As we climbed into his truck, I couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease, but I pushed it aside. This was just a kind stranger helping out some stranded tourists. Nothing to worry about. How wrong I was. At first, everything seemed fine. Earl made small talk as we drove, asking about our trip and telling us about life in this part of the country. But after about 20 minutes, I realized something was off. We should have been heading towards more populated areas, but instead, the landscape was getting more desolate. "Earl," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Are you sure this is the way to town?" He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw it, that manic glint in his eyes. "Oh, we're not going to town," he said, his voice suddenly cold. "We're going somewhere much more interesting." My blood ran cold. I felt Sarah tense beside me. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Earl's only response was to step on the gas. The truck lurched forward, speedometer climbing as we left the highway for a bumpy dirt road. "What the hell, man?" I shouted, grabbing for the door handle. But Earl had thought of that. The locks were engaged, and there was no way to open them from the inside. "I wouldn't try anything stupid if I were you," Earl said, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a wicked-looking hunting knife. He kept his eyes on the road, but the threat was clear. Sarah let out a choked sob beside me. I wrapped an arm around her, my mind racing. What was this lunatic planning? Where was he taking us? The landscape outside became a blur as Earl drove deeper into the desert. The sun was setting, painting the sky in reds and purples that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. Now, it just felt ominous, like the desert itself was bleeding. After what felt like hours but was probably only about 45 minutes, Earl finally slowed the truck. We'd arrived at nothing. just a flat expanse of desert, no buildings or landmarks in sight. "Everybody out," Earl growled, waving the knife threateningly. Shaking, Sarah and I climbed out of the truck. The desert air was cooling rapidly as night fell, and I could feel goosebumps rising on my arms, though that might have been more from fear than cold. Earl herded us away from the truck, the knife glinting in the fading light. "Start walking," he ordered, pointing into the darkness. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We don't have much money, but you can take what we have. Just let us go." Earl let out a harsh laugh. "This ain't about money, boy. This is about survival." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "This desert, it's got a hunger," Earl said, his eyes wild. "It needs to be fed, and if I don't feed it, it'll take me instead." I stared at him, uncomprehending. Had the isolation out here driven this man insane? Or was there something darker at play? "And now walk," Earl said, prodding me in the back with the knife. We had no choice but to obey. We stumbled forward into the darkness, the only light coming from the stars above and the faint glow of Earl's truck headlights behind us. After about 10 minutes of walking, Earl called for us to stop. "This'll do," he muttered, more to himself than to us. "Do for what?" I asked, dreading the answer. Instead of replying, Earl began to chant in a language I didn't recognize. The words were guttural, harsh, and they seemed to hang in the air unnaturally. And then, to my horror, the ground began to shake. At first, I thought it was an earthquake, but then I saw it, a massive shape rising from the sand like some monstrous worm breaching the surface of an ocean. Sarah screamed. I stood frozen in terror. The thing, whatever it was, towered above us, easily the size of a house. In the dim starlight, I could make out rows of gnashing teeth and writhing tentacles. "The desert's hungry," Earl said, his voice filled with a twisted kind of reverence, "and you're the meal." As the monster lunged towards us, survival instinct finally kicked in. I grabbed Sarah's hand and we ran, our feet slipping in the loose sand. I could hear Earl laughing behind us, his voice mixing with the otherworldly roar of the creature. We ran blindly into the night, gasping for breath, our hearts pounding. I had no idea where we were going, but anywhere was better than back there. After what felt like miles, we finally collapsed, our legs giving out. As we lay there in the sand, gulping in air, I strained my ears for any sign of pursuit. But there was nothing, just the whisper of wind over sand and our own ragged breathing. What was that thing?" Sarah gasped out between breaths. I shook my head. "I don't know. I don't want to know." I pushed myself up to sitting, looking around. In every direction, there was nothing but darkness and desert. We need to find help. But how? We were miles from anywhere, with no food, no water, and no idea which way to go. The situation seemed hopeless. Then, in the distance, I saw a faint glow. Civilization. "Look," I said, pointing. "Let's head that way. It's our best shot." And so we walked. Hours passed. The glow never seemed to get any closer, but we pushed on. What choice did we have? As the sky began to lighten with the approach of dawn, I started to wonder if we'd been walking towards a mirage. But then, finally, we crested a small rise and saw it. A gas station. Its fluorescent lights a beacon of hope in the desert. The attendant's eyes went wide when he saw us stumble in, dirty, exhausted, and wild-eyed. We must have looked half mad as we babbled our story about the crazy man and the monster in the desert. In the end, we told the police a sanitized version, that we'd been kidnapped by a crazy local Sikh, but had managed to escape. They never found Earl or any trace of his truck. As for the thing we saw, we kept that to ourselves. Who would believe us anyway? We made it home eventually, but the experience changed us. I still have nightmares about that night. The sound of Earl's chanting, the sight of that monstrous shape rising from the sand, And sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I could swear I hear something. A distant roar, hungry and inhuman. I don't know if what we saw that night was real, or just a hallucination brought on by fear and the desert heat. But I do know one thing. I'll never look at the desert the same way again. Because now I know that in those vast, empty spaces, ancient and terrible things might be hiding just beneath the surface. And they're always hungry. The moment I saw her, I knew something was terribly wrong. She sat motionless in the hospital bed, her skin pale as the sheets around her, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. But it wasn't her appearance that sent a chill down my spine. It was the fact that according to every chart, every record, and every other member of the staff, she didn't exist. I've been a night shift nurse at St. Mary's Hospital for over a decade. I thought I'd seen it all. Gruesome injuries, miraculous recoveries, and everything in between. But nothing could have prepared me for that night. It started like any other shift. I clocked in at 11 p.m., got my assignments from the day nurse, and began my rounds. Everything was routine until I reached room 237. The door was slightly ajar, which was odd. We always kept patient doors closed at night. I pushed it open, clipboard in hand, ready to check on Mr. Johnson, the elderly man recovering from hip surgery who'd been assigned to this room. But Mr. Johnson wasn't there. Instead, I saw her. She looked to be in her early 20s, with long, dark hair spread out on the pillow around her. Her eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling. An IV drip was attached to her arm, steadily pumping clear fluid into her veins. I blinked, confused. Had there been a mix-up with room assignments? I checked my clipboard again. No, this was definitely supposed to be Mr. Johnson's room. "Excuse me, miss," I said softly, approaching the bed. "I think there might have been some confusion. Can you tell me your name?" No response, not even a flicker of her eyes. I reached for the chart at the end of her bed, but there was nothing there. Frowning, I checked the name on the wristband all patients wear. It was blank. A sense of unease began to creep over me. This wasn't right. Every patient is supposed to be logged, every bed accounted for. Who was this woman, and how had she ended up here without any records? I decided to check with the charge nurse. Surely she'd know what was going on. "Hey, Linda," I said, trying to keep my voice casual as I approached the nurse's station. "Do you know anything about the patient in 237? There seems to be some mix-up." Linda looked up from her computer, brow furrowed. 237? That's Mr. Johnson's room. Hip replacement, remember? I nodded slowly. Right, but there's a young woman in there now. Dark hair, early 20s. Do you know if there was a room change? Linda's frown deepened. "What are you talking about, Sarah? There haven't been any room changes. Mr. Johnson is in 237. My heart began to race, but I just saw her. "Can you come look?" With a sigh, Linda stood up. "All right, let's go see what's going on." We walked back to room 237 together. I pushed open the door, ready to show Linda the mysterious patient, but the room was empty. The bed was neatly made, untouched. There was no sign that anyone had been there at all. I stood there, mouth agape, as Linda brushed past me to check the bathroom. "There's no one here, Sarah," she said, giving me a concerned look. "Are you feeling all right? Maybe you need to take a break." I nodded numbly, unable to process what was happening. Had I imagined the whole thing? But it had seemed so real. For the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the image of that pale, unresponsive woman. I kept finding excuses to pass by room 237, half expecting to see her there again. But each time, the room was empty. As my shift neared its end, I decided to do one final check. I don't know what I was expecting. Part of me hoped I'd find the room empty again, proving that I had just been overtired and imagining things. But when I opened the door, my heart nearly stopped. She was back. This time, she was sitting up in bed, her dark eyes fixed on me as I entered. A chill ran down my spine as I realized she was smiling. A small, secretive smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Her smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed just a bit too sharp. "Don't you know?" she said, her voice raspy as if from disuse. "You're the one who called me here." I took a step back, my hand fumbling for the door handle behind me. I don't understand." "What do you mean?" She tilted her head, regarding me with those unsettling dark eyes. "This place, it's full of pain, of suffering. It draws us. And you, with your compassion, your desire to help, you're like a beacon." My mind was reeling. This couldn't be happening. Ghosts weren't real. This had to be some kind of hallucination, a mental breakdown brought on by too many night shifts and not enough sleep. But even as I tried to rationalize it, I knew deep down that this was real. The chill in the air, the goosebumps on my skin, this was no figment of my imagination. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out. Her smile faded, replaced by a look of intense longing. To live again, to feel, to be more than just a shadow lingering in the spaces between life and death. She reached out a pale hand towards me. "You could help me. Your life force, your energy, it could bring me back." I recoiled, pressing myself against the door. "No, I can't. I won't." Her face contorted with anger, all pretense of humanity dropping away. In that moment, she looked ancient, terrifying, a creature of nightmare barely contained in human form. "You don't have a choice," she snarled, lunging towards me with inhuman speed. I screamed, throwing myself out of the room and slamming the door shut behind me. I could hear her howling with rage on the other side, the sound more animal than human. Linda and 2 security guards came running. "Sarah, what's wrong?" Linda cried, taking in my pale, shaking form. "In there," I gasped, pointing at the door. "There's someone." One of the guards pushed past me, throwing open the door. But just like before, the room was empty. No sign of the woman, no evidence of any disturbance. Linda put a comforting arm around my shoulders. "Sarah, honey, I think you need to go home. You're obviously exhausted." I wanted to protest, to make them understand what I'd seen, but I knew how it would sound. So I nodded, allowing Linda to lead me away. As we walked down the hall, I glanced back one last time. There, in the doorway of room 237, I saw her. She was watching me, that small, secretive smile back on her face. As our eyes met, she raised a finger to her lips in a shushing gesture before fading away like mist. I called in sick the next day, and the day after that. When I finally returned to work, I requested a transfer to the day shift. I told myself it was because I needed a change, that the night shift was messing with my sleep schedule. But deep down, I knew the real reason. I was afraid of what, or who, I might see in those quiet, shadowy hospital corridors at night. Months have passed since that night, and I haven't seen the woman again. Sometimes I manage to convince myself that it was all just a stress-induced hallucination. But then I'll catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a pale face, dark hair, and my heart will skip a beat. Because I know she's still there, lurking in the shadows of St. Mary's, waiting, watching. And sometimes, late at night when the hospital is quiet, I swear I can hear her whispering my name. I don't know what she is, a ghost, a demon, or something else entirely. But I do know one thing. In those liminal spaces between life and death, in the sterile corridors and quiet rooms of the hospital, there are things that defy explanation, things that hunger, things that wait, and sometimes, if you're not careful, they might just notice you noticing them. So if you ever find yourself in a hospital late at night, and you see a patient that no one else seems to acknowledge, my advice is this: don't make eye contact. Don't engage. And whatever you do, don't let them know you can see them. Because once they know you can see them, they'll never leave you alone. As for me, I still work at St. Mary's. I still care for my patients. Still do my best to bring comfort and healing. But I never walk past room 237 if I can help it. And I always keep one eye on the shadows. Because I know now that in a place where the veil between life and death is at its thinnest, anything is possible. And not all of those possibilities are benign. So the next time you're in a hospital and you feel a chill run down your spine, or see something move in your peripheral vision, remember my story. And remember, just because you can't see them, doesn't mean they're not there. Watching, waiting, hungry for life. The first sign that something was terribly wrong was the toothbrush. It wasn't mine or my wife's. But there it was. A third toothbrush in our bathroom, still wet from recent use. That's when I realized the previous owners of our new house hadn't just left some of their belongings behind, they had never left at all. We'd been so excited about this house. After years of cramped apartment living, Sarah and I had finally saved enough for a down payment on our dream home. It was a charming Victorian in a quiet neighborhood, with more space than we knew what to do with. The price had seemed almost too good to be true, but we chalked it up to the house needing some TLC. We were more than happy to put in the work to make it our own. The first few days after moving in were a whirlwind of unpacking boxes and arranging furniture. We were so busy that we barely noticed the little oddities at first. A chair that wasn't quite where we'd left it. The faint sound of footsteps when we were both in the same room. We brushed these off as tricks of memory or settling noises in an old house. But then came the toothbrush incident. I stood there in the bathroom, staring at that blue toothbrush, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. "Sarah," I called out, my voice sounding strangely hollow in the tiled room. "Did you buy a new toothbrush?" She appeared in the doorway, a quizzical look on her face. No. Why?" I pointed wordlessly at the offending object. Sarah's eyes widened as she saw it, then narrowed in confusion. "That's weird," she said slowly. "Maybe the previous owners forgot it." It was a rational explanation, but something about it didn't sit right with me. The toothbrush looked too new, too recently used. And why hadn't we noticed it before? That night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone in the house. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind outside had me on edge. Sarah must have sensed my unease because she reached out and squeezed my hand in the darkness. "It's just an old house," she murmured sleepily. "It'll take some getting used to." I wanted to believe her. But as I drifted off into an uneasy sleep, I couldn't help but feel that something was watching us from the shadows. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment I smiled, thinking Sarah had gotten up early. Then I remembered, Sarah hated coffee. She was a tea drinker through and through. I bolted out of bed, my heart racing. Sarah was still asleep beside me. The smell of coffee grew stronger as I crept down the stairs, my bare feet silent on the old wood. The kitchen was empty when I reached it, but a fresh pot of coffee sat in the machine, steam still rising from its surface. 2 mugs sat on the counter beside it, one still half full of the dark liquid. My hands shook as I touched the mug. It was warm. That was the moment I knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that we were not alone in this house. Over the next few days, the incidents escalated. We'd come home to find lights on that we were sure we'd turned off. Books would be moved from one room to another. Once, I found a half-eaten sandwich in the fridge that neither of us had made. Sarah was skeptical at first, trying to find logical explanations for everything. But even she couldn't deny the evidence piling up around us. Our dream home was quickly becoming a nightmare. We tried to research the history of the house, hoping to find some clue about what was happening. But our efforts turned up nothing unusual. just a series of normal families who had lived and moved on. It was a week after the coffee incident that we discovered the hidden room. We were in the attic, sorting through some old boxes left by the previous owners, when Sarah leaned against a wall and it moved. A section of the paneling swung inward, revealing a small, dark space beyond. Heart pounding, I grabbed a flashlight and peered inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was a bedroom, tiny but fully furnished. A small cot, a desk, a chair, and everywhere, covering every surface, were photographs, hundreds of them. Photos of us, eating dinner, watching TV, sleeping in our bed. Photos taken from inside our house, in places where no one should have been able to stand without us noticing. Sarah let out a choked sob beside me. I pulled her close, my mind reeling as I tried to make sense of what we were seeing. That's when we heard it, the sound of footsteps coming up the attic stairs. We froze, clinging to each other in terror. The footsteps grew closer, slow and deliberate. Then, a voice, soft, almost gentle. "I see you found my room." An old man stepped into view, his face lined with age but his eyes sharp and alert. He smiled at us, but there was no warmth in the expression. Who are you?" I managed to stammer out. "I'm Albert," he said, as casually as if we were meeting at a neighborhood barbecue. "I used to own this house. Still do, in a way." Sarah found her voice. "But we bought this house. We have the paperwork." Albert waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, I'm sure you do. But you see, I could never really leave this place. It's my home. Has been for over 50 years. A chill ran down my spine as the implications of his words sank in. "You've been living here all this time?" He nodded, looking almost proud. "In the walls, in the hidden spaces, watching. This house. It's a part of me now, and I'm a part of it." I felt Sarah trembling beside me. I wanted to run, to grab her and flee this madness. But something held me in place. Fear, morbid curiosity, or perhaps some strange power Albert held over his domain. "Why?" Sarah whispered. "Why didn't you just leave?" Albert's face darkened. "Leave? This is my home, my life's work. Every brick, every board, I know them all. I've watched families come and go, living their lives in my house. But they always leave in the end. Not me. Never me." He took a step closer, and we instinctively backed away. "And now you're here, young, full of life, just like Agnes and I were, all those years ago." "Agnes?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Albert's eyes misted over. "My wife. She left. Couldn't handle the solitude, the secrecy. But I stayed. I had to stay." A new horror dawned on me. "The previous owners, did they know about you?" He smiled that cold smile again. "Oh yes, they knew. They tried to force me out, to reclaim their house. But this house, it has a way of protecting me. They left in the end. They always do." My mind was racing. We had to get out of here, had to call the police. But as if reading my thoughts, Albert shook his head. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said softly. "This house, it doesn't like outsiders. Bad things tend to happen when people try to interfere." As if to emphasize his point, the attic door suddenly slammed shut with a bang that made us all jump. "You see," Albert said, spreading his arms wide, "the house knows. It protects me. Us. Now." "Us," Sarah echoed, her voice trembling. Albert's grin widened, showing too many teeth. "Oh yes, you're a part of the house now too, just like me. We're going to be one big, happy family." The full horror of our situation crashed over me. This man, this thing, whatever he was, had no intention of letting us leave. We were trapped in this nightmare, this house that was more than a house. I grabbed Sarah's hand, my mind made up. "We're leaving," I said. trying to sound braver than I felt. Now, and if you try to stop us. But Albert just laughed, a sound that seemed to echo from the very walls around us. Oh, you can try to leave. They all do at first, but you'll be back. The house won't let you go that easily. It's in your blood now, just like it's in mine. With that, he turned and walked into the hidden room, the panel swinging shut behind him with a final sounding click. We didn't waste any time. We ran from the attic, down the stairs, out the front door. We didn't stop running until we reached our car, parked on the street. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Albert stood in the upstairs window, watching us go. Even from a distance, I could see the smile on his face. He raised a hand in a mocking wave. We never went back to that house. We left everything behind. Clothes, furniture, all of it. It wasn't worth the risk. We stayed with friends, then found a new place to live. We tried to move on, to forget. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear the creaking of old floorboards, the whisper of hidden passages, and in my dreams I see Albert's face, smiling that cold smile, welcoming me home. Because deep down, I fear he was right. The house is a part of us now, and one day it might call us back. But for now, we run, we hide, and we pray that the house and Albert never find us again. The last fare of the night is always the worst. That's what I used to think anyway. But after what happened that foggy Tuesday evening, I realized how wrong I was. Sometimes, the last fare isn't just the worst, it's the one that changes everything. I've been driving a cab in the city for 15 years. I've seen it all, or so I thought. Drunks, fighters, lovers, the occasional celebrity. But nothing could have prepared me for that night. It was just past midnight, and I was ready to call it quits. The fog had rolled in thick, blanketing the city in a soupy haze that made driving a nightmare. I was about to radio in that I was heading home when the call came through. Pickup at 1242 Sycamore Street. The dispatcher's tired voice crackled over the radio. Last one of the night, Jake. I sighed, weighing the extra cash against my warm bed waiting at home. In the end, greed won out. Roger that, I replied, already turning the cab toward Sycamore. The streets were eerily empty as I drove, the fog swallowing up the glow from the streetlights. It felt like I was driving through a ghost town. By the time I pulled up to 1242 Sycamore, my nerves were on edge. The house was dark, no lights on inside or out. I was about to radio back to dispatch when I saw movement in the shadows. A figure emerged from the fog, tall and thin, walking with an odd, jerky gait. As they approached the cab, I got a better look. It was a man, or at least I thought it was. He wore a long, dark coat that seemed to blend into the night, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. Something about him set my teeth on edge, but I couldn't put my finger on why. He opened the back door and slid in without a word. The temperature in the cab seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Where to?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady as I glanced in the rearview mirror. The man didn't look up, his face still hidden by the hat. When he spoke, his voice was low and raspy, like he hadn't used it in a long time. "Drive," he said. "I'll tell you when to stop." Every instinct I had was screaming at me to kick this guy out and drive away fast. But something, curiosity, stupidity, or maybe just the promise of a good fare, made me put the cab in drive and pull away from the curb. We drove in silence for what felt like hours, but my watch told me it was only 20 minutes. The fog grew thicker, until I could barely see the road in front of me. I was completely lost, having left the familiar city streets behind long ago. "Turn here," the man suddenly said, making me jump. I hadn't even seen a turn, but sure enough, there was a narrow road leading off into what looked like dense woods. "Look, buddy," I started to say. "I don't think—" "Turn," he repeated. and this time there was an edge to his voice that brooked no argument. Heart pounding, I made the turn. The road was barely more than a dirt track, branches scraping against the sides of the cab as we crawled along. The fog pressed in around us, so thick now that I could barely see past the hood of the car. After a few minutes, the man spoke again. "Stop." I brought the cab to a halt, the engine idling loudly in the silence. We were in some kind of clearing, though I couldn't see much beyond a few feet in any direction. "We're here," the man said. I turned to look at him, fear finally overcoming my curiosity. "Look, I don't know what's going on, but..." My words died in my throat as I got my first clear look at his face, or rather, where his face should have been. Under the brim of the hat was nothing, just empty, swirling darkness. I scrambled for the door handle, my heart thundering in my chest. But before I could open it, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. "Don't be afraid," the thing said. "I just need a ride home, and you're going to help me get there." That's when I noticed the world outside the cab had changed. The fog was gone, replaced by a starless void. We weren't in a clearing anymore. We weren't anywhere. "What are you?" I managed to choke out. The being tilted its head, the motion unnaturally smooth. "I am a traveler like you, just trying to get home." "And where is home?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. The darkness where its face should be seemed to swirl faster. "Somewhere else. Somewhere your kind can't normally go. But with your help, with your vehicle, I can make it back." I shook my head, trying to clear it. This couldn't be happening. I must have fallen asleep at the wheel, crashed the cab. This was all some dying hallucination. But the cold grip on my shoulder felt real enough. "I don't understand," I said. "How can my cab possibly—" "Your vehicle is more than just metal and rubber," the being interrupted. "It's a vessel, imbued with the energy of countless journeys. With the right modifications, it can traverse more than just physical distance." As it spoke, I became aware of changes happening to the cab. The interior seemed to be stretching, expanding in impossible ways. The dashboard lights flickered and changed, showing readings and symbols I didn't recognize. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We're preparing for the journey," the being replied. "Your vehicle is adapting to traverse the spaces between realities." I wanted to run, to wake up from this nightmare. But some part of me, some traitorous spark of curiosity, wanted to see where this impossible fare would lead. "What do I need to do?" I heard myself asking. I felt rather than saw the being smile. "Drive," it said simply. "I'll guide you." And so I drove. I don't know how long we traveled through that starless void. Time seemed to have no meaning there. The being beside me called out directions in a language I shouldn't have been able to understand, but somehow did. We passed through realms of light and shadow, through spaces filled with colors I had no names for. I saw things that defied description, creatures and landscapes that shouldn't exist. Throughout it all, I drove. My hands on the wheel were the only things that felt real, the only connection to the world I knew. Finally, after what could have been minutes or millennia, we arrived. The void outside the cab windows solidified into a landscape that hurt my eyes to look at, all sharp angles and impossible geometries. "We're here," the being said, its voice tinged with what sounded like relief. "Thank you for the ride." It opened the door and stepped out. As it did, I caught a glimpse of others like it, moving in ways that made my brain ache to process. "Wait," I called out, surprising myself. "How do I get back?" The being turned back to me, the darkness under its hat swirling one last time. "The way back is always easier than the way there," it said. "Just drive and think of home. Your vehicle remembers the way." And with that, it was gone, leaving me alone in a reality I didn't belong in. For a moment, I sat there, paralyzed with fear and awe. Then, slowly, I put the cab in drive. I thought of my small apartment, of the city I knew, of the world that made sense. The cab lurched forward, and reality blurred around me once more. When everything settled, I found myself back on Sycamore Street, right where I'd picked up my impossible fare. The fog had lifted, and the first light of dawn was peeking over the horizon. I sat there for a long time, trying to process what had happened. Part of me wanted to believe it was all a dream, a hallucination brought on by too many late nights and too much coffee. But I knew better. The cab's odometer showed thousands more miles than it had before. And there, on the passenger seat, was a single coin, made of a metal I'd never seen before, etched with symbols that hurt my eyes to look at directly. I never told anyone what happened that night. Who would believe me? I kept driving my cab, but I never took another fare after midnight. And I always kept an eye out for tall, thin figures emerging from the fog, because now I know the truth. That sometimes, the last fare of the night isn't just a ride across town. Sometimes, it's a journey to places beyond imagination. And once you've made that trip, you're never quite the same again. So if you ever find yourself in a cab late at night, and the driver seems a little jumpy, a little too eager to get you to your destination and be done, well, maybe give them a break. They might have seen things you couldn't imagine, and they might be worried that this fare could be their last, in more ways than one. The forest was alive that night, but not in the way it should have been. As I stared at the bizarre symbols carved into the trees surrounding our campsite, I realized with growing horror that we weren't just lost. We were trapped in a nightmare that defied explanation. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway. My best friends, Mike and Sarah, had convinced me to join them on a camping trip in the remote wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. "It'll be great," Mike had said. "Just us, nature, and not a care in the world." If only we had known what was waiting for us in those ancient woods. The first day had gone well enough. We hiked deep into the forest, following a trail that wound through towering redwoods and fragrant pines. By late afternoon, we found a perfect clearing to set up camp. As the sun set, we sat around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. It felt like old times, back when life was simpler and our biggest worry was passing our next exam. It wasn't until the next morning that things started to go wrong. We woke to find our campsite shrouded in an unnaturally thick mist. The air felt heavy, oppressive, making it hard to breathe. And the forest, it was silent. No bird song, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just an eerie, all-encompassing quiet. Maybe it's just the weather, Sarah suggested, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. We decided to pack up and head back to the trailhead. That's when we discovered the first of the symbols. It was carved into the trunk of a massive oak tree about eye level. A complex, swirling design that seemed to shift and change the longer you looked at it. None of us recognized it, but something about it sent a chill down my spine. "Probably just some other campers messing around," Mike said with forced cheerfulness. But as we started walking, we found more symbols. They were everywhere, carved into trees, etched into rocks, even scratched into the dirt of the path. And the path, it wasn't right. We'd followed a clear, well-maintained trail into the forest, but now it was overgrown, barely visible in places. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. After an hour of walking, we should have reached the trailhead. Instead, we found ourselves back at our campsite. "This is impossible," Sarah whispered, her face pale. "We've been walking in a straight line. How can we be back here?" We tried again, this time using Mike's compass to keep our bearings. But no matter which direction we chose, we always ended up back at the clearing. It was as if the forest itself was shifting around us, herding us back to where we started. As night fell, the true horror of our situation began to sink in. We were lost, yes, but it was more than that. The forest had changed. The trees seemed taller, more ancient, the shadows deeper and darker. And those symbols, they were glowing now, pulsing with a faint, sickly light. We huddled around our campfire, jumping at every snapping twig and rustling leaf. None of us wanted to admit it, but we all felt it. We were being watched. "We need to get out of here," Mike said, his voice tight with fear. "First light tomorrow. We make a run for it. Pick a direction and just go, no matter what." Sarah and I nodded, too scared to argue. But as I lay in my tent that night, listening to the unnatural silence of the forest, I knew it wouldn't be that easy. I must have dozed off eventually, because I woke with a start to the sound of chanting. It was faint at first, barely audible over the pounding of my heart, but it grew louder, echoing through the trees. I unzipped my tent with shaking hands, peering out into the darkness. What I saw made my blood run cold. Figures moved in the shadows between the trees, tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that bent at odd angles. They swayed in time to the chanting, circling our campsite, and their eyes, God, their eyes glowed with the same sickly light as the symbols. I wanted to scream, to wake Mike and Sarah, but fear had frozen my voice. I could only watch in mute horror as the figures drew closer, their chanting growing louder and more frenzied. Just when I thought they would breach the circle of our campsite, a new sound cut through the night. A horn, deep and resonant, echoing through the forest. The figures stopped, their heads turning as one towards the sound. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they melted back into the shadows. I sat there, shaking, until the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees. As soon as it was light enough to see, I woke Mike and Sarah, my words tumbling out in a panicked rush as I told them what I'd seen. They were skeptical at first, but the fear in my eyes must have convinced them. We packed up camp in record time, leaving behind anything we didn't absolutely need. But as we tried to leave the clearing, we found our way blocked. The trees had grown closer overnight, their trunks pressed so tightly together it was like a wall of wood. The symbols carved into their bark seemed to writhe and pulse, as if alive. "No," Sarah whispered, pressing her hands against the living barrier. "No, this can't be happening." Mike tried to hack through with his camping hatchet, but the wood seemed impervious to the blade. After a few swings, he threw the hatchet down in frustration. "What the hell is going on?" he shouted at the uncaring forest. As if in answer, the chanting started again. Closer this time, and accompanied by the sound of snapping branches and rustling leaves. They were coming. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her along. We crashed through the underbrush, no longer caring about following a path. Our only thought was to get away, to find some way out of this nightmare forest. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs felt like lead. But no matter how far or fast we went, the chanting followed. Sometimes it seemed to come from right behind us. Other times it echoed from all directions at once. As the day wore on, the forest grew darker. The canopy above became so thick that barely any light filtered through. We were running blind, stumbling over roots and rocks, our arms and faces scratched by low-hanging branches. And still, we couldn't escape. Every time we thought we'd found a way out, the forest would shift around us, herding us back towards the center, towards something we couldn't see but could feel waiting for us. Night fell, plunging us into total darkness. We huddled together, too exhausted and terrified to keep running. The chanting grew louder, closer. I could hear movement in the darkness around us, the snap of twigs under inhuman feet. "I'm sorry," Mike whispered. "I'm so sorry I brought us here." Sarah was crying softly, her hand clutching mine so tightly it hurt. I wanted to comfort them, to say something brave and reassuring. But the words stuck in my throat as I saw them, the glowing eyes, emerging from the darkness. They surrounded us, those impossible figures. In the dim light cast by their eyes and the pulsing symbols, I could see them clearly for the first time. They were like a child's drawing of a person, all wrong proportions and angles that shouldn't exist in nature. Their skin was bark-like, their hair a tangle of leaves and twigs. As they drew closer, the chanting reached a fever pitch. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But then, cutting through the chant, came that horn again, louder this time, and accompanied by the sound of pounding hooves. My eyes flew open just in time to see a figure burst into our circle. It rode a massive stag, its antlers gleaming like polished silver in the dark. The rider was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing armor that seemed to be made of living wood and leaves. It raised a horn to its lips and blew again. The sound washed over us like a physical force, and the chanting creatures recoiled. "You do not belong here," the rider said, its voice like the creaking of ancient trees. "Go, now." The creatures hesitated for a moment, then melted back into the shadows. The forest seemed to exhale, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. The rider turned to us. "You have strayed into a place not meant for your kind," it said. "I will guide you back to your world, but you must never return. The old ways are waking, and the forest grows hungry." In a daze, we followed the rider through the darkened forest. As we walked, I noticed the symbols on the trees changing, becoming less alien, less threatening. The air grew lighter, fresher. Finally, after what felt like hours, but could have been minutes, we emerged from the tree line. I nearly wept at the sight of our car, parked exactly where we'd left it days ago. "Remember," the rider said as we stumbled towards the vehicle. "The forest remembers. Do not come back." When I turned to thank it, the rider was gone. There was no sign of the stag, no hoof prints in the soft earth. Just the edge of the forest, looking perfectly ordinary in the early morning light. We drove home in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. We never spoke about what happened that weekend, not to each other and certainly not to anyone else. Who would believe us? But sometimes, on dark nights when the wind whispers through the trees, I think I can hear it, a faint, distant chanting. And I know that somewhere out there, in the depths of the forest, ancient and terrible things are stirring. And I pray that they stay there, in the shadows between the trees, where we can pretend they don't exist. Because the alternative, that they might one day step out of those shadows and into our world, is too terrifying to contemplate. The chanting started at midnight, a low, rhythmic drone that seeped through the walls of my professor's house. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe some late-night TV left on in another room. But as I descended into that accursed basement, I knew I was lying to myself. What I found there would haunt me for the rest of my days. It was supposed to be an easy gig. Professor Blackwood, my favorite lecturer in the anthropology department, had asked me to house-sit for a week while he attended a conference in Europe. "Just water the plants, feed the cat, and don't go into the basement," he'd said with a wink. I should have asked why, should have pressed for more information, but I was too excited about the prospect of staying in his beautiful Victorian home, surrounded by his extensive library of rare books. The first few days were uneventful. I spent my time reading, enjoying the quiet of the old house, and occasionally venturing into town for supplies. The cat, a surly old tomcat named Algernon, largely ignored me except at mealtimes. It was on the fourth night that things changed. I was up late, poring over an obscure text on Mesopotamian burial rites, when I first heard it. A faint sound, barely audible, coming from somewhere below. At first, I dismissed it as the house settling or pipes groaning, but it persisted, growing louder as the night wore on. By midnight, it was unmistakable, chanting, low and rhythmic in a language I didn't recognize. It seemed to be coming from the basement, the one place Professor Blackwood had explicitly told me not to go. I tried to ignore it, to focus on my book, but the chanting wormed its way into my brain, making it impossible to concentrate. It ebbed and flowed, sometimes fading to near silence, other times swelling to a volume that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. After an hour of this, my curiosity finally overcame my trepidation. I had to know what was going on down there. Grabbing a flashlight, I made my way to the basement door. It was locked, of course, but I remembered seeing a ring of keys in the professor's study. It didn't take long to find the right one. The door creaked open, revealing a set of steep stairs descending into darkness. The chanting grew louder, more insistent. I flicked on my flashlight and began to descend, each step feeling like a betrayal of the professor's trust. The basement was larger than I expected, stretching out beyond the beam of my flashlight. The air was thick with the scent of incense and something else, something coppery and unpleasant. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I began to make out shapes in the darkness. Bookshelves lined the walls, crammed with ancient-looking tomes. Tables were scattered about, covered in strange artifacts and bubbling alembics. But it was the center of the room that drew my attention. There, in a circle of flickering candles, stood an altar. It was made of rough-hewn stone, its surface stained dark with what I desperately hoped wasn't blood. Arranged around it were symbols I recognized from my studies, occult sigils and eldritch runes that had no business existing outside of dusty old grimoires. The chanting was coming from behind the altar. As I approached, my heart pounding in my chest, I saw a figure hunched over an open book. It was muttering in that strange language, its voice rising and falling in time with the chants I'd heard upstairs. I must have made a sound, a gasp, a whimper, I'm not sure, because suddenly, the figure straightened and turned towards me. In the flickering candlelight, I saw its face, and my blood ran cold. It was Professor Blackwood, but not as I knew him. His eyes were wild, pupils dilated to the point where they seemed entirely black. Dark veins stood out against his pale skin, pulsing in time with the chanting that still echoed through the basement. "Ah, my dear student," he said, his voice somehow both his own and not. "I'm glad you've joined us. We've been expecting you." I wanted to run, to flee back up the stairs and out of that cursed house, but my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, transfixed by the horror before me. What is this?" I managed to stammer. "Professor, what's going on?" He smiled, a grotesque parody of the warm grin I was used to seeing in his lectures. "This, my dear, is true knowledge. The kind they don't teach in universities. The kind that opens doors to realms beyond our own." As he spoke, I became aware of movement in the shadows behind him. Things were stirring, drawn by his words and the incessant chanting that now seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. "You see," Blackwood continued, "anthropology is just the beginning, a way to understand the surface-level beliefs of cultures. But beneath that, in the depths of human experience, there are truths that most are too afraid to face." He gestured to the book on the altar. "This tome contains rituals passed down through millennia, hidden from those who would suppress them. With it, I can pierce the veil between worlds, commune with entities older than time itself." I found my voice again. But why? What could possibly be worth this? His eyes gleamed with a fervor that chilled me to my core. "Power, my dear. Knowledge beyond imagining. The ability to reshape reality itself." As he spoke, the shadows behind him coalesced into shapes that hurt my eyes to look at directly. Tentacles, eyes, mouths, all shifting and changing in ways that defied physics and sanity alike. "And now that you're here," Blackwood said, reaching out towards me, "you can join us. Become part of something greater than yourself." That broke the spell. With a cry of terror, I turned and fled, taking the stairs two at a time. Behind me, I could hear Blackwood's laughter mixing with the chanting and other, more terrible sounds. I didn't stop running until I was out of the house and halfway down the street. I spent the night in a cheap motel, jumping at every sound, convinced that at any moment, those otherworldly horrors would come bursting through the walls. When morning came, I debated whether to go to the police. But what would I tell them? That my professor was performing eldritch rituals in his basement, that I'd seen things that shouldn't exist outside of nightmares. They'd think I was insane or on drugs. In the end, I did nothing. I returned to my dorm room and tried to forget what I'd seen, but the memories haunted me. I couldn't concentrate in class, couldn't sleep without nightmares plaguing me. A week later, Professor Blackwood returned to campus as if nothing had happened. He taught his classes, held office hours, acted completely normal. But sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, I'd catch a glimpse of that manic gleam in his eyes. I dropped his class and, of course, changed my major entirely. I couldn't bear to be in the same room as him, knowing what I knew. But even years later, long after I'd graduated and moved away, I couldn't shake the memory of that night. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear chanting, a low, rhythmic drone that makes my skin crawl and my heart race. And I wonder what horrors Professor Blackwood unleashed with his forbidden rituals. What ancient, terrible things now walk the earth because of his obsession with hidden knowledge. I try to tell myself it was all a hallucination, a bad dream brought on by too much studying and not enough sleep. But deep down, I know the truth. I've seen behind the veil, glimpsed realities that our minds aren't equipped to handle, and I know that out there, in the shadows between what we know and what we fear, things are stirring. So if you ever find yourself house-sitting for a professor with an extensive occult library and a locked basement, take my advice. Don't go down there. Some knowledge isn't meant for mortal minds. Some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. And the price of forbidden wisdom is often higher than anyone is prepared to pay. The first time my GPS tried to kill me, I thought it was a glitch. The third time, I realized something far more sinister was at play. By then, it was too late. I was already lost in a forest that shouldn't exist, with no way out and something hungry lurking in the shadows. It all started on what should have been a routine drive home from my sister's place in the country. I'd made the trip a dozen times before, but this time, I decided to use the new GPS system I'd installed in my car. It'll be faster, I told myself. Maybe I'll discover a new scenic route. Those words would come back to haunt me. The first couple of hours were uneventful. The GPS guided me along familiar highways and back roads, its robotic voice a soothing presence in the quiet car. But as night fell and I entered a more remote area, things began to change. In 500 meters, turn right, the GPS intoned. I frowned. There shouldn't be a right turn here, just a straight shot through to the highway on. But I could see a small dirt road coming up on my right, barely visible in the growing darkness. That can't be right, I muttered to myself, but the GPS was insistent. Turn right now, it commanded. Against my better judgment, I made the turn. The dirt road was rough, jostling my car as I crawled along at a snail's pace. Trees pressed in on both sides, their branches scraping against the windows like skeletal fingers. After about 10 minutes of this, I'd had enough. This clearly wasn't the right way. I went to turn around, but the road had narrowed to the point where there was barely enough room for my car, let alone space to make a U-turn. Recalculating, the GPS chirped. Continue straight for 2 kilometers. No way, I said aloud. We're going back. I started to reverse, trying to retrace my path. That's when things got weird. The GPS screen flickered, the map distorting for a moment. When it stabilized, it showed me in a completely different location, somewhere in the middle of a vast forest, miles from any road. Turn left now, the GPS said, its voice suddenly deeper, more insistent. I ignored it, continuing to back up slowly. But no matter how far I went, The trees didn't thin out. The road didn't widen. It was as if the forest was growing around me, swallowing me up. Panic started to set in. I fumbled for my phone, but there was no signal. The GPS screen flickered again, and this time when it cleared, the map was gone entirely. In its place was a swirling symbol, hypnotic and alien. "You have arrived at your destination," the GPS said, in a voice that no longer sounded even remotely human. That's when I saw the eyes in my rear-view mirror. Glowing, hungry eyes, watching me from the darkness between the trees. I slammed on the gas, no longer caring about the rough terrain. Branches whipped at my windshield as I plowed forward, deeper into the impossible forest. The GPS continued to speak, but now it was in a language I didn't recognize, guttural and ancient sounding. I drove for what felt like hours, the forest never thinning, never changing. My gas gauge dropped steadily, and I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. But every time I tried to turn around or backtrack, I'd catch a glimpse of those eyes in my mirror, always watching, always following. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I finally ran out of gas. The car sputtered to a stop in a small clearing. For a long moment, I just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart pounding in my chest. The GPS gave one final crackle, and then went silent. In the sudden quiet, I could hear something moving in the underbrush around me, slow, deliberate movements. Whatever had been chasing me all night was closing in. With shaking hands, I reached for the door handle. I had no plan, no idea what I was going to do, but I couldn't just sit there and wait for whatever was out there to get me. As I stepped out of the car, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The pre-dawn light cast everything in a gray, otherworldly glow. And there, at the edge of the clearing, I saw them. They were like nothing I'd ever seen before, vaguely humanoid in shape, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. Their skin was the color and texture of tree bark, and their eyes... God, their eyes were those same glowing orbs I'd seen in my rearview mirror all night. They didn't move as I stood there, frozen in terror. They just watched, their gaze hungry and patient. They knew they had me, knew I had nowhere to go. That's when I heard it. A sound cutting through the unnatural silence of the forest. A car engine. I turned towards the sound, hope surging through me. And there, impossibly, was a road. A normal, paved road that I could have sworn wasn't there a moment ago. I didn't stop to question it. I ran, sprinting towards the sound of approaching civilization. Behind me, I heard inhuman shrieks of fury, the sound of snapping branches as the creatures gave chase. I burst out onto the road just as a truck came around the bend. The driver, an older man with a weathered face, slammed on his brakes, looking at me with a mixture of shock and concern. "Please," I gasped, glancing back at the forest. The creatures were gone, melted back into the shadows between the trees. But I could still feel their eyes on me. "Please, I need help." The truck driver, bless him, didn't ask questions. He just opened the passenger door and gestured for me to get in. As we drove away, I watched the forest recede in the side mirror. Just before it disappeared from view, I could have sworn I saw a familiar swirling symbol etched into one of the trees. I never went back for my car, never reported what happened to the police. Who would believe me? I threw away my GPS and stuck to paper maps after that. But sometimes, on long drives through rural areas, I'll catch a glimpse of something in my rearview mirror, a flash of glowing eyes, or a too-tall figure standing unnaturally still by the side of the road. And I'll remember that night, lost in a forest that shouldn't exist, pursued by things that defy explanation. So if you're ever out driving and your GPS tries to direct you down a road that doesn't look quite right, do yourself a favor, ignore it. Stick to the route you know, because there are places out there in the dark spaces between destinations that aren't meant for humans to find. Places where ancient, hungry things wait patiently for lost travelers to stumble into their domain. And once they've got you in their sights, they never really let you go. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night to find my phone's map app open, displaying that same swirling symbol. And in the distance, I'll hear something that sounds almost like a GPS voice, distorted and inhuman, saying over and over, recalculating, return to your destination. We're waiting for you. I've learned to ignore it, to shut off my phone and close my eyes and tell myself it's all in my head. But deep down, I know the truth. I know that somewhere out there, in a forest that exists outside of normal reality, those creatures are still waiting, still hungry, still hoping that one day I'll take a wrong turn and find my way back to them. So be careful out there on the road, and whatever you do, don't blindly trust your GPS, because you never know where or what it might be leading you to. The first alert came at 2:17 a.m., a shrill beep that jolted me awake, followed by the robotic voice of my home security system. Motion detected in the living room. By the third alert, I knew something was terribly wrong. By the 10th, I realized I was trapped in my own home with something that shouldn't exist. I'd always been a bit of a tech geek, so when the latest smart home security system hit the market, I had to have it. Cameras in every room, motion sensors, the works. All controllable from my smartphone. It made me feel safe, knowing I could keep an eye on my house even when I wasn't there. But that night, it became my worst nightmare. The first alert woke me from a dead sleep. I fumbled for my phone, squinting at the bright screen. The app showed me a live feed of my living room, but it was empty, just shadows and moonlight filtering through the curtains. Must be a glitch, I muttered, dismissing the alert and rolling over to go back to sleep. 17 minutes later, another alert. This time, motion detected in the kitchen. Again, I checked the feed. Nothing. I was about to shut off the alerts entirely when a third one came through. Motion detected in the hallway. Now I was starting to get freaked out. 3 false alarms in one night. That wasn't normal. I sat up in bed, fully awake now, and started cycling through all the camera feeds. Living room, empty. Kitchen, empty. Hallway, empty. Everything looked normal, but something felt off. The shadows seemed deeper somehow, the silence of the house more oppressive. I was about to get up and do a physical check of the house when every single alert went off at once. My phone exploded with notifications, the screen flashing with multiple camera feeds. Motion detected in the living room. Motion detected in the kitchen. Motion detected in the hallway. Motion detected in the guest bedroom. On and on it went, alerting me to movement in every room of the house. But as I frantically cycled through the feeds, I couldn't see anything out of place. No burglars, no animals that might have gotten in. Just empty rooms and long shadows. Heart pounding, I got out of bed. Whatever was going on, I needed to figure it out. As I reached for the doorknob, my phone pinged again. Motion detected in the master bedroom. I froze. That was impossible. I was the only one in here, and I hadn't moved enough to trigger the sensor. Slowly, I turned to look at my phone screen. The feed from my bedroom camera showed me, standing by the door, but behind me, in the corner of the room, was a shadow that seemed to move independently of anything else, growing larger as I watched. I spun around, but the corner was empty. When I looked back at my phone, the shadow was gone from the feed too. That's when the true horror of the situation started to sink in. Something was in my house. Something that could trigger my motion sensors but didn't show up on camera. Something that could appear and disappear at will. I ran out of the bedroom and down the stairs, my bare feet slapping against the hardwood floors. I had to get out, had to get help. But as I reached the front door, I found it wouldn't open. The smart lock had engaged, and no matter how I pulled or pushed, it wouldn't budge. My phone pinged again. Intruder alert. All exits locked for your safety. Safety, right. I was locked in with whatever this thing was. I ran to the living room windows, but they too were sealed shut. In my panic to feel secure, I'd installed locks on every possible entry point, all controllable through the security system, and now that same system was trapping me inside. For the next hour, I ran from room to room, trying every window, every door. My phone continued to blow up with alerts, always one step behind me. Motion detected in the living room as I ran to the kitchen. Motion detected in the kitchen as I dashed upstairs. It was like the thing was chasing me, always just out of sight. I caught glimpses of it sometimes, a flicker of movement in a mirror, a shadow that didn't quite match the objects casting it. But every time I turned to look directly at it, there was nothing there. As dawn approached, I found myself huddled in a corner of the living room, my useless phone clutched to my chest. The alerts had stopped coming, but that almost made it worse. Now there was just silence, heavy and expectant. I must have dozed off at some point, exhaustion finally overcoming terror. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through the windows. My phone was dead, and the house was quiet. Normal. Cautiously, I got to my feet. Nothing jumped out at me. No shadows moved where they shouldn't. Had it all been some sort of waking nightmare? I managed to disengage the smart lock on the front door. Whatever had been controlling it seemed to have lost power along with my phone. As I stepped outside, gulping in the fresh morning air, I almost managed to convince myself that I had imagined the whole thing. A vivid nightmare brought on by stress and too much late-night TV. But then I saw it, scratched into the wood of my front door, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. A symbol, complex and alien. It seemed to shift and change the longer I stared at it, making my eyes water and my head spin. I slammed the door shut and ran, not stopping until I reached the coffee shop 3 blocks away. As I sat there, hands shaking around a cup of coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Had my security system been hacked? Was I losing my mind? Or was there really something in my house? Something that defied explanation and preyed on my deepest fears? I didn't go home that day, or the next. I stayed with a friend, making up a story about a gas leak in my house. When I finally worked up the courage to return, a week later, everything seemed normal. No more alerts, no more moving shadows. But sometimes, late at night, I'll hear my phone ping. And even though I've uninstalled the security app, even though I've had the whole system ripped out, I'll see that notification, motion detected. I tell myself it's just a glitch, a remnant of the app that didn't fully uninstall. But deep down, I know better. Whatever came into my house that night, whatever triggered those alerts and moved in the shadows, it's still there. Waiting. Watching. I sleep with the lights on now. I've covered all the mirrors in the house, and I've learned to live with the constant feeling of eyes on me, of movement just at the edge of my vision. Because I know the truth now. Our homes aren't the safe havens we think they are. The technology we rely on to protect us can just as easily be turned against us. And there are things out there, things that live in the spaces between what we can see and what we can explain, that are always looking for a way in. So if you ever find yourself jolted awake by an unexpected alert from your home security system, think twice before dismissing it as a glitch. Because sometimes, the things that go bump in the night are all too real. And once they've found a way into your home, into your life, they never really leave. They just wait, patient and hungry, for the moment you let your guard down, for the moment you forget to check that alert. Convince yourself it's nothing, because that's when they strike, and by then it's already too late. The sun was setting when we rolled into town, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. It should have been beautiful, but something about the empty streets and shuttered windows made my skin crawl. As night fell, We realized our mistake. This wasn't just any small town. It was a trap, and we had driven right into it. It was supposed to be a fun family road trip. My wife, Sarah, our 2 kids, Tommy and Lisa, and I had been planning it for months. We were going to drive across the country, see all the cheesy tourist traps and natural wonders along the way. Make memories, you know? We were about halfway through our journey when it happened. We'd been driving all day. The kids were getting cranky, and we were all ready for a break. That's when we saw the sign, "Welcome to Millbrook, population 506, last stop for 100 miles. "What do you say we stop for the night?" I asked Sarah. She nodded, relief evident on her face. The kids perked up at the prospect of stretching their legs. As we drove into town, I felt the first stirrings of unease. The streets were deserted, not a soul in sight. All the storefronts were dark, their windows covered with newspaper or heavy curtains. "Must be a Sunday," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. We found a motel on the edge of town, the only building with its lights on. The neon vacancy sign flickered weakly as we pulled into the parking lot. The man at the front desk was old, his skin papery and pale. He barely looked at us as he handed over the key, his eyes fixed on something over our shoulders. When I turned to look, there was nothing there. Our room was musty and outdated, but we were too tired to care. We ordered pizza from the only place in town that seemed to deliver. The guy who brought it looked nervous, his eyes darting around as he practically threw the box at me and ran back to his car. As we ate, we could hear movement outside, shuffling footsteps, whispered conversations. Every time I went to the window to look, the street was empty. But I could feel eyes on us, watching from behind those covered windows. The kids fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's travel. Sarah and I stayed up a bit longer, trying to find something to watch on the ancient TV. That's when we heard it, a soft tapping at the door. I got up to answer it, but Sarah grabbed my arm. "Don't," she whispered, fear evident in her eyes. The tapping came again, more insistent this time. Then a voice, low and gravelly. "We know you're in there, outsiders. Come out. Join us." My blood ran cold. I grabbed the chair from the desk and wedged it under the doorknob. The tapping turned to pounding, the single voice joined by others. A chorus of "Join us" rose from outside, growing louder and more frenzied with each passing second. Sarah was shaking the kids awake. "We have to go," she said, her voice trembling. "Now." We grabbed what we could and made for the bathroom window. It was small, but we were desperate. I helped Sarah through first, then passed the kids to her. As I was squeezing through, I heard the door of our room splinter. We ran to our car, the sound of pursuit close behind. As I fumbled with the keys, I caught a glimpse of our attackers in the rearview mirror. They looked wrong. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, and their eyes, God, their eyes were pitch black, reflecting the moonlight like pools of oil. The engine roared to life and I floored it, tires squealing as we peeled out of the parking lot. In the rearview mirror, I could see them flooding out of the motel, pouring into the street behind us. We raced through the town, taking turns at random, trying to find a way out. But every road seemed to lead us back to the center of town. It was like the layout of the streets was changing, shifting to keep us trapped. "There!" Sarah shouted, pointing at a road leading out of town. I swung the car around, hope surging through me. But as we approached the town limit, our hopes were dashed. A crowd of townspeople stood there, blocking the road. They stood unnaturally still, their black eyes fixed on our approaching car. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop just feet from the human barricade. For a long moment, nobody moved. We sat there, engine idling, staring at the wall of people in front of us. They stared back, unblinking. Then, as one, they began to move towards us. Their movements were puppet-like, jerky and uncoordinated. But they moved with purpose, closing in on our car from all sides. "Dad?" Tommy's voice came from the back seat, small and scared. "What's happening?" I didn't have an answer for him. I threw the car into reverse, but we were surrounded now. Hands slapped against the windows, faces pressed against the glass. Their mouths moved in unison. Join us. Become one with us. Sarah was sobbing, clutching the kids close. I was about to tell them I loved them, sure that this was the end, when suddenly the crowd parted. A figure walked through the gap, different from the others. It was the old man from the motel, but he seemed more. His eyes were the same pitch black as the others, but they held an intelligence, a malevolence, that the rest lacked. He approached my window, and to my horror, I found myself rolling it down. I couldn't stop my hand. It was like my body was no longer under my control. "Welcome to Millbrook," the old man said, his voice resonating in a way that made my teeth ache. "We've been waiting for you." "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my own voice sounding distant and strange to my ears. The old man smiled, revealing teeth that were just a bit too sharp. "We want you to stay, to become part of our family. This town, it hungers, and you, my dear outsiders, are the feast." As he spoke, I felt a pull, a desire to step out of the car, to join the crowd, to become one with Millbrook. From the corner of my eye, I could see Sarah's hand moving to her seatbelt, her face blank. "No!" I shouted, the sound snapping me back to reality. I slammed my foot on the gas, not caring who or what was in our way. The car lurched forward, knocking the old man aside. People bounced off the hood as we plowed through the crowd. I heard screams, both from outside and inside the car, but I didn't stop, couldn't stop. We burst through the human barricade and suddenly we were on an open road, the town receding behind us. I drove for hours, until the sun began to rise, afraid that if I stopped, we'd find ourselves back in that nightmare town. We never spoke about what happened that night. How could we? Who would believe us? We cut our trip short and went home, but things were never the same. Sometimes, I catch Sarah staring off into space, a blank look in her eyes. The kids have nightmares they can't explain. And me? I can't shake the feeling that we didn't really escape. That a part of us is still there in Millbrook, waiting with the rest of those poor souls for the next unsuspecting travelers. So if you're ever on a long road trip and you see a sign for a town you've never heard of, do yourself a favor. Keep driving, no matter how tired you are, no matter how much you need a break. Because some towns aren't meant to be visited. Some places exist only to trap the unwary, to feed on their essence. And once they've got a taste of you, they never really let you go. The mansion loomed before us, a decaying giant swallowed by the forest. As we stepped inside, the musty air carried whispers of secrets long buried. But it wasn't until we found the fresh food in the kitchen that we realized we weren't alone. Something was living here, hidden in the shadows of a place that shouldn't exist. I've always been drawn to abandoned places. There's something about the decay, the forgotten stories, that calls to me. So when my best friend, Mike, told me he'd found coordinates to a supposedly haunted mansion deep in the woods, I was all in. We set out early on a Saturday morning, our backpacks loaded with cameras, flashlights, and enough snacks to last the day. The hike was tougher than we expected. The forest grew denser the further we went, the trees pressing in close, their branches seeming to reach for us as we passed. After hours of trudging through underbrush and checking our GPS, we finally broke through into a clearing. And there it was. The mansion was enormous, at least 3 stories tall, with turrets and balconies that spoke of a bygone era of wealth and opulence. But time had not been kind. Vines crawled up the walls, windows were shattered, and part of the roof had caved in. "This is impossible," Mike breathed, eyes wide. "There's no record of any building out here. How did we not know about this?" I shook my head, equally amazed. "Let's check it out." We approached cautiously, years of urban exploring having taught us to be wary of rotting floorboards and unstable structures. The front door hung off its hinges, creaking ominously as we pushed it open. The interior was a mess of decay and faded grandeur. Tattered carpets squelched under our feet, heavy with years of rainfall from the holes in the ceiling. Ornate furniture lay scattered and broken, and paintings hung askew on mold-spotted walls. We moved slowly through the rooms, cameras clicking away, documenting every bizarre detail. In what must have been a ballroom, a massive chandelier lay shattered on the floor, crystals spread out like a glittering pond. "This place is unreal," Mike said, his voice hushed with awe. "It's like time stopped here 100 years ago." But as we explored further, things started to feel off. In a study filled with rotting books, I noticed a desk with a clean spot in the dust, as if someone had recently been writing there. In a bedroom, the sheets were rumpled, like someone had just gotten out of bed. "Mike," I called out, my unease growing. "Are you seeing this?" He nodded, his earlier excitement replaced by caution. "Yeah, something's not right here." We pressed on, our exploration now tinged with a growing sense of dread. And then we found the kitchen. Unlike the rest of the house, the kitchen showed signs of recent use. Very recent. A pot sat on the ancient stove, still warm to the touch. The sink held freshly washed dishes. And on the counter, a loaf of bread that couldn't have been more than a day old. Mike and I exchanged looks of disbelief and fear. "We need to go," he said, already backing towards the door. "Now." But before we could move, we heard it. Footsteps, coming from upstairs. Heavy, deliberate steps that creaked on old floorboards. Panic surged through me. We bolted for the front door, all thoughts of caution forgotten. But as we reached the entrance hall, we found our path blocked. A figure stood there, tall and gaunt, dressed in clothes that looked as old and decayed as the house itself. But it was the face that froze the scream in my throat. Where there should have been eyes, nose, and mouth, there was only smooth, blank skin. The thing cocked its head, regarding us with a face that couldn't see. Then it spoke, the words somehow forming without a mouth. "Visitors," it said, the voice echoing in our heads rather than our ears. "How delightful. It's been so long since we've had guests." Mike made a strangled sound beside me. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything, but my body wouldn't respond. I was rooted to the spot, terror coursing through my veins. "Please," the thing continued, taking a step towards us. "Won't you stay for dinner? We have so much to discuss." That broke the spell. We turned and ran, deeper into the house, away from the horrifying greeter. I could hear it following, its footsteps unnaturally fast behind us. We raced through rooms, upstairs, along corridors that seemed to stretch and twist in impossible ways. The house itself seemed alive, changing around us, leading us deeper into its depths. Finally, gasping for breath, we found ourselves in a circular room at the top of one of the turrets. There was nowhere left to run. As we stood there, chests heaving, the door slowly creaked open. But it wasn't the faceless figure that entered. It was a woman, beautiful in an otherworldly way, her eyes glowing with an inner light. "Don't be afraid," she said, her voice melodious and soothing. "We mean you no harm. We just get so lonely here." What are you?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking. She smiled, and in that smile I saw eons. "We are the caretakers, the guardians of this place that exists between your world and others. This house, it's a doorway, and sometimes it needs to be fed." As she spoke, I became aware of movement all around us, shadows taking shape, forming into figures both human and not. They filled the room, watching us with hungry eyes. "Please," Mike whimpered beside me. "Let us go. We won't tell anyone about this place." The woman's smile turned sad. "Oh, my dears, don't you see? You can't leave. You're part of the house now. Part of us." And then they were upon us. I felt cold hands grasping at me, pulling me into their embrace. I tried to fight, to scream, but it was like moving through molasses. The last thing I remember is the woman's voice. gentle and remorseless. Welcome home. I woke up in my own bed, sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare. But then I saw the dirt under my fingernails, leaves tangled in my hair. Mike was gone. His family reported him missing, but the police never found any trace of him. They questioned me, of course, but I couldn't tell them the truth. Who would believe me? Sometimes, late at night, I think I can hear whispers, voices calling from just beyond the edge of sleep. And in my dreams, I'm back in that mansion, wandering endless corridors, searching for something I can never find. I don't go exploring anymore. I've given up my urban exploration hobby, sold all my gear, but I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. That someday, the house will call me back. That Mike is there, waiting for me in those twisted halls. And the worst part of me wants to go, because now I know the truth. There are places in this world that shouldn't exist, doorways to realms beyond our understanding. And once you've glimpsed what lies beyond, you're never truly free. So if you're ever hiking in the deep woods and you come across a mansion that's not on any map, do yourself a favor. Turn around, go home, pretend you never saw it. Because some mysteries are better left unsolved, some doors better left unopened. And if you hear whispers in the night, calling you to come explore, to uncover secrets long buried, cover your ears, close your eyes, and whatever you do, don't answer. Because once the house has chosen you, it never really lets you go. The first time I heard my own voice screaming for help from my phone, I thought I was going crazy. By the third call, I knew something far more sinister was at play. Whatever was on the other end of the line wasn't just mimicking my voice. It was me, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't begin to understand. It started on a Tuesday night. I was settling in for a quiet evening at home, scrolling through social media and half watching some mindless reality TV show. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, displaying my own number on the caller ID. I frowned, assuming it was just another spoofed robocall. But curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. "Hello?" I said, expecting to hear a recorded message about an extended car warranty. Instead, I heard my own voice, panicked and breathless. "Help me. Please. Oh God, help me. They're coming. They're..." The call cut off abruptly. I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, a chill running down my spine. It had been my voice, no doubt about it. But how? And what the hell was going on? I tried to shake it off, tell myself it was just some elaborate prank. Maybe someone had used one of those AI voice cloning tools. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The terror in that voice, my voice, had been too real. I couldn't sleep that night, jumping at every little sound, half expecting to hear my own screams echoing through the apartment. When my alarm went off the next morning, I was already awake, staring at the ceiling with gritty, bloodshot eyes. I went through my day in a daze, unable to focus on work, constantly checking my phone. Part of me hoped it would ring again, so I could prove to myself that I wasn't going crazy. Another part dreaded that very thing. It was just after lunch when it happened again. Same number, same caller ID. This time, I hesitated before answering, my hand shaking as I raised the phone to my ear. "Who is this?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you want?" "Listen to me," my own voice hissed back, low and urgent. "You need to run. Get out of the office now. They've found me, and they'll be coming for you next. Please, you have to..." The call cut off again, leaving me with a dial tone and a growing sense of dread. I looked around the office, half expecting to see some threat lurking in the corners. But everything was normal. My co-workers tapped away at their keyboards, oblivious to my internal panic. I made it through the rest of the day somehow, though I couldn't have told you what I actually accomplished. As soon as 5 o'clock hit, I was out the door, racing home to... What? Hide? Try to figure out what was going on. I didn't know. but I knew I couldn't stay at the office a minute longer. That night, I started researching. I looked up everything I could find about phone spoofing, voice cloning, elaborate pranks. But nothing I found could explain what I was experiencing. The level of terror in those calls, the specificity of the warnings. It all felt too real to be faked. I was deep in a Reddit rabbit hole about parallel universes when my phone rang for the third time. I almost didn't answer it. Almost. But I had to know. This time, there was no mistaking the background noises. Screams, inhuman roars, the sound of tearing metal. And over it all, my voice, ragged and desperate. "Listen carefully," I heard myself say. "I don't have much time. You need to understand. This isn't a prank or a joke. I'm you, from another timeline, another reality. Something's broken the barriers between worlds, and they're coming through. You need to." There was a sound like reality tearing apart, and the call went dead. I sat there in the dark, my phone clutched in a white-knuckled grip, trying to process what I'd just heard. It was insane, impossible, but some part of me knew it was true. Over the next few days, the calls kept coming. Sometimes it was warnings, frantic attempts by my other self to prepare me for something. Other times, it was just screams, the sounds of battle, glimpses into a war I couldn't see or understand. I stopped going to work, stopped answering calls from anyone but myself. I taped over my windows, stockpiled food and water, prepared for I didn't know what. A week after the first call, things changed. I was jolted awake by my ringtone, fumbling for the phone in the dark. "They're here," my voice said, calm now, resigned. "I'm sorry. I tried to warn you, to prepare you. But there's nothing we can do now. They're coming for you. Just like they came for me. All of us, across every timeline. I hope your reality lasts longer than mine did. Goodbye, and good..." The call cut off mid-word, but this time it wasn't replaced by a dial tone. Instead, I heard something. A sound that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. A noise that shouldn't exist in our reality. And then I saw it. A tear in the air itself. Like reality was a sheet of paper someone had taken scissors to. Through the tear, I caught glimpses of things. Shapes that hurt to look at. That my mind couldn't quite process. I ran, out of my apartment, down the stairs, into the street. But everywhere I looked, I saw more tears forming. More of those impossible things pushing through. People were screaming now, running from horrors I could barely comprehend. Cars crashed as drivers caught sight of things that shouldn't exist. The sky itself seemed to be splitting apart, revealing a void beyond that was somehow alive and hungry. I kept running, though I knew it was hopeless. I could feel reality crumbling around me, the laws of physics breaking down. Gravity flickered on and off, buildings twisted into impossible shapes, and everywhere those things poured through the tears. As I felt my own reality begin to tear apart, my phone rang one last time. I answered it, knowing what I'd hear, my own voice, tired and sad. "I'm sorry. It's too late for us. But maybe, somewhere out there, in some other timeline, another version of us will figure it out. We'll stop this before it starts. Good luck." The world dissolved around me, and I felt myself falling through layers of broken realities. In that last moment, I realized something. I needed to warn myself, to try and stop this, even if it was futile. With the last of my strength, I focused on a time before all this started. I reached out across dimensions I didn't understand and made a call. "Hello?" I heard my own voice answer, blissfully unaware of what was coming. "Help me!" I screamed into the void. "Please, oh God, help me! They're coming! They're..." And then I was gone, scattered across a million shattered realities. But somewhere out there, I knew another me was just beginning this nightmare. And maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to stop it. So if you ever get a call from your own number and hear your own voice screaming for help, Listen carefully. Your entire reality might depend on it, because sometimes the call is coming from inside the multiverse, and the danger is more real than you could ever imagine. The first time I saw my reflection blink, I thought it was a trick of the light. The second time, I convinced myself I was overtired. But when it started moving independently, whispering things only I could hear, I realized I was trapped in a nightmare that defied all logic. It all began on a Tuesday evening. I'd just gotten home from a long shift at the hospital, my eyes heavy with exhaustion. As I stumbled into my bathroom to wash up before bed, I caught a glimpse of movement in the mirror. For a split second, I could have sworn my reflection's eyes moved before mine did. I blinked hard, shaking my head. "Get it together, Sarah," I muttered to myself. "You're just tired." But as the days passed, these odd occurrences became more frequent. My reflection would smile a fraction of a second before I did. Its hand would twitch when mine was still. Tiny discrepancies, but enough to send a chill down my spine every time I noticed them. I started avoiding mirrors, hurrying past them with my eyes averted. I covered the one in my bathroom with a towel, ignoring the odd looks from my roommate. But I couldn't escape my reflection entirely. It was always there, lurking in windows, shiny surfaces, even the black screen of my phone. A week after that first incident, things escalated. I was brushing my teeth, carefully not looking directly at the mirror when I heard a whisper, so faint I almost missed it over the sound of running water. "Sarah." I froze, toothbrush halfway to my mouth. Slowly, heart pounding, I raised my eyes to the mirror. My reflection stared back at me, but its eyes were wrong. They were my eyes, but filled with a darkness I'd never seen before. And then it smiled, a slow, cruel thing that I definitely wasn't doing. The toothbrush clattered into the sink as I stumbled backward. A scream caught in my throat. My reflection didn't move with me. It stood there, still smiling that terrible smile. "Hello, Sarah," it said, its voice a twisted version of my own. "We need to talk." I ran from the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my bed, lights blazing, jumping at every shadow. When morning came, I convinced myself it had been a vivid nightmare brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something was very, very wrong. Over the next few days, I tried to go about my life normally. I went to work, hung out with friends, all while studiously avoiding any reflective surfaces. But I could feel it watching me. Always. A presence just at the edge of my vision. Patient and hungry. It was a week later when it happened again. I was alone in the break room at work, refilling my coffee mug, when I saw my reflection in the shiny surface of the coffee machine. It waved at me, grinning widely while I stood frozen in horror. "You can't ignore me forever, Sarah," it said, its voice somehow coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We're a part of each other, you and I. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be." "What are you?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "What do you want?" My reflection's grin widened impossibly. "I'm you, Sarah. The you that you keep hidden away. All your darkest thoughts, your deepest desires. And what I want out." I dropped my mug, hot coffee splashing across the floor. By the time I looked back at the coffee machine, my reflection was normal again, mirroring my terrified expression. That night, I finally broke down and told my roommate, Lisa, what was happening. I expected her to think I was crazy, to suggest I see a therapist. Instead, her face went pale. "Oh God," she whispered. "It's happening to you too?" My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, too?" Lisa's eyes darted around the room, as if afraid of being overheard. "It started for me a month ago. My reflection, it started doing things I wasn't doing. Saying things. Horrible things. She shuddered. I thought I was losing my mind. What did you do? I asked, desperate for any solution. I tried to ignore it at first, but it just got worse. It started trying to convince me to do things. Terrible things. Lisa's voice dropped to a whisper. I think it's trying to take over. A chill ran down my spine. Take over? How? But before Lisa could answer, we heard a crash from her bedroom. We rushed to investigate, but the room was empty. The only thing out of place was her full-length mirror, now lying shattered on the floor. And in each shard of glass, we saw Lisa's reflection, laughing silently. From that moment on, things spiraled out of control. Our reflections became bolder, appearing in every reflective surface we encountered. They whispered constantly, urging us to give in, to let them take control. We tried everything we could think of. We covered every mirror in the apartment, avoided water and shiny surfaces. But it wasn't enough. Our reflections found ways to reach us, their voices growing louder and more insistent with each passing day. I started to notice changes in Lisa. She became withdrawn, jumpy. I'd catch her talking to herself, or rather, to her reflection, when she thought I wasn't around. Her eyes grew darker, her smile a little too wide. One night, I woke to the sound of breaking glass. I rushed to Lisa's room, but she was gone. The mirror we'd covered was uncovered, the sheet lying in a heap on the floor. And in the glass, I saw Lisa's reflection, smiling triumphantly. She's ours now, it said in Lisa's voice, but not Lisa's voice. And soon, you will be too. I ran. I didn't stop to pack, didn't stop to think. I just ran, out of the apartment, into the night. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't escape. Every window I passed, every puddle on the street, showed me my reflection. Watching. Waiting. I've been on the run for weeks now. I don't know how much longer I can hold out. My reflection is always there, growing stronger as I grow weaker. Sometimes, I catch myself moving in ways I didn't intend, saying things I didn't mean to say. I'm losing control, bit by bit. I'm writing this as a warning. If you start to notice odd things about your reflection, if it seems to move on its own, if you hear whispers when you're alone, don't ignore it. Don't pretend it's not happening. Because by the time you accept the truth, it might be too late. They're out there, these dark reflections of ourselves, waiting for a moment of weakness, a crack in our reality that they can slip through. And once they're out, they'll do anything to stay. So be careful the next time you look in a mirror. The face looking back at you might not be your own. And if you see it smile when you're not smiling, if you hear it whisper when your lips aren't moving, run, and don't look back. Because in the end, the most terrifying monster isn't the one lurking in the shadows. It's the one staring back at you from the other side of the glass, wearing your face and knowing your deepest, darkest secrets. And it's hungry. So very, very hungry. The day my smartwatch started predicting deaths, I thought it was a glitch. When the predictions came true, I realized I was caught in a nightmare of my own making. With each countdown, another life hung in the balance, and I was powerless to stop it. It all started innocently enough. I'd always been a tech enthusiast, eager to try out the latest gadgets. So when the new UltraFit smartwatch hit the market, boasting advanced health monitoring and predictive algorithms, I was first in line to get one. For the first few weeks, it was great. The watch tracked my steps, monitored my heart rate, even analyzed my sleep patterns. I became obsessed with optimizing my health metrics, constantly checking the app for new insights. Then, about a month after I got the watch, I noticed something odd. A new notification popped up on the screen, countdown, 24 hours. Below it, in smaller text, was my aunt's name. I frowned, tapping the screen for more information, but there was nothing else. Just that ominous countdown and my aunt's name. I figured it must be some kind of bug, maybe a reminder I'd set and forgotten about. I made a mental note to check the settings later and went about my day. 24 hours later, I got the call. My aunt had suffered a sudden heart attack. She didn't make it. As I stood there, phone still in hand, my watch vibrated. The countdown had reached 0, and below it, a new message appeared. Prediction accurate. New countdown initiating. My blood ran cold. It couldn't be a coincidence, could it? But the alternative was too horrifying to contemplate. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself it was just a terrible fluke. I dug through the watch's settings, searched online forums, even contacted customer support, but I found nothing to explain what had happened. Then, a week later, another countdown appeared. This time it was for 72 hours, with my best friend's name underneath. Panic set in. I called my friend immediately, warning him to be careful, to stay home if possible. He laughed it off, telling me I was being paranoid. But I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my stomach. As the hours ticked by, I grew more and more anxious. I checked on my friend constantly, much to his annoyance. When the countdown reached its final hour, I was a nervous wreck. Then, with just minutes to go, I got the call. My friend had been in a car accident. He was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. He was gone. Once again, as the countdown hit 0, my watch vibrated. Prediction accurate. New countdown initiating. This time, I couldn't deny it. Somehow my watch was predicting deaths, and I was powerless to stop them. The next few months were a nightmare. Countdowns appeared randomly, sometimes with days of warning, sometimes with only hours. I tried everything I could think of to prevent the predicted deaths. I warned people. I called the police with anonymous tips. I even tried destroying the watch. But nothing worked. The watch seemed indestructible, and no matter what I did, the predictions always came true. It was like fate itself was conspiring against me, ensuring that these deaths occurred no matter what. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating. My whole life became consumed by these countdowns, by my desperate attempts to save lives I knew, deep down, couldn't be saved. My friends and family started to worry. They thought I was having some kind of breakdown, and how could I explain to them what was really happening? They'd think I was crazy. Hell, I thought I was crazy, but the countdowns kept coming, and with each one, another person died. Sometimes it was people I knew, sometimes strangers whose names I'd never heard before. But always, the watch was right. I tried to get rid of the watch, to give it away or sell it, but every time I took it off, I was overwhelmed by a sense of panic. What if I missed a countdown? What if I could have saved someone? The guilt was unbearable. So I kept it on, this harbinger of doom strapped to my wrist. I became a prisoner to its predictions, living my life in increments between countdowns. Then, one day, a new countdown appeared. But this time, it was different. The time frame was longer, 30 days, and the name below it was my own. I stared at the watch face, my heart pounding. Was this it? Had the watch finally turned its grim prediction on me? For a moment, I felt relief. At least it would be over. No more dreading the next countdown, no more futile attempts to change fate. But then the fear set in. 30 days. What would happen in those 30 days? I became paranoid, seeing potential death in every situation. I barely left my house, had my groceries delivered, worked from home. But the countdown kept ticking down, indifferent to my precautions. As the final day approached, I was a wreck. I'd said goodbye to my family and friends, settled my affairs. All that was left was to wait. With 1 hour to go, I sat in my living room, staring at the watch. The seconds ticked by, each one bringing me closer to what? I didn't know. And that was the most terrifying part. As the countdown reached its final minute, I closed my eyes, bracing myself for whatever was to come. The watch vibrated. I opened my eyes, expecting, I don't know what I expected. Death? Pain? Some kind of cosmic reckoning. But I was still there. Still alive. I looked down at the watch. The screen was blank for a moment. Then a message appeared. Prediction cycle complete. Resetting. And just like that, it was over. The watch returned to its normal functions, showing the time, my heart rate, my step count. No more countdowns, no more deaths. I sat there for a long time, trying to process what had happened. Had it all been some sort of test, a glitch in the system, or something more, something I couldn't begin to understand? In the days that followed, I waited anxiously for another countdown to appear, but none came. The watch was just a watch again, but I was changed. How could I not be, after months of predicting deaths, of carrying that terrible knowledge? I found myself looking at people differently, wondering about the fragility of life, the inevitability of death. I kept the watch, though I don't wear it anymore. It sits in a drawer, a reminder of that impossible time. Sometimes, late at night, I take it out and turn it on, half expecting to see another countdown. But it remains silent, its dark secrets locked away. I don't know if what happened to me was real, or if I somehow experienced the most elaborate delusion in history. But I do know this. We're all on a countdown, whether we can see it or not. And maybe the real lesson isn't about trying to change fate, but about making the most of the time we have. So if you ever come across a smartwatch that seems too good to be true, that offers insights beyond what should be possible, think twice before putting it on. Because some knowledge comes at too high a price, and once you've glimpsed the workings of fate, you can never unsee them. As for me, I've learned to live with uncertainty, to appreciate each day as it comes, because in the end, it's not about how much time we have, but what we do with it. And I, for one, am done counting down. The elevator doors opened to reveal a floor that shouldn't exist, and in that moment, I knew our building held secrets darker than I could have ever imagined. Little did I know, stepping out onto that impossible level would plunge me into a nightmare from which there might be no escape. I've lived in the Greystone apartments for 5 years now. It's a decent enough place, not too fancy, but clean and well-maintained. 15 floors of mostly young professionals and small families. I'm on the 10th floor, with a view of the city skyline that almost makes up for the constant noise of traffic below. That fateful day started like any other. I was heading to work, coffee in hand, barely awake as I waited for the elevator. When it arrived, I stepped in without really looking, my mind already on the day ahead. It wasn't until the doors were closing that I noticed I wasn't alone. A woman stood in the corner, so still and quiet I'd almost missed her. She was pale, with long dark hair that fell over her face. Something about her sent a chill down my spine, but I couldn't put my finger on why. I nodded politely and pressed the button for the lobby. The woman didn't move or acknowledge me. As the elevator descended, I found myself stealing glances at her, trying to place why she seemed so odd. Was she a new tenant? I was pretty sure I knew everyone in the building, at least by sight. We passed the second floor, and suddenly the elevator jerked to a stop. The lights flickered, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought we were going to plummet. But then everything stabilized, and the doors slid open. What I saw made my breath catch in my throat. Instead of the lobby, or any floor I recognized, the doors had opened onto a long, dimly lit corridor. The walls were a sickly green color, the paint peeling in places to reveal dark stains underneath. Flickering fluorescent lights cast strange shadows, and the air that wafted in smelled musty and wrong. I stood there, frozen in confusion and the beginnings of fear. This wasn't right. Our building didn't have a floor like this. I turned to the woman, about to ask if she knew what was going on, but the words died in my throat. She was looking directly at me now, and her eyes... God. Her eyes were solid black, like empty pits in her pale face. She smiled, revealing teeth that were just a bit too sharp. "Your floor," she said, her voice a raspy whisper that seemed to echo in the small space. Before I could react, she was behind me, her cold hands on my back. With surprising strength, she shoved me out of the elevator. I stumbled forward, nearly dropping my coffee. By the time I regained my balance and spun around, the elevator doors were already closing. The last thing I saw was that terrible smile, and then I was alone in the impossible corridor. For a long moment, I just stood there, trying to make sense of what had happened. This had to be some kind of mistake, right? Maybe I was still asleep, and this was all some bizarre dream. But the musty air filling my lungs felt all too real, as did the cold dread settling in my stomach. Tentatively, I took a few steps down the corridor. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. Doors lined the hallway on both sides, their paint chipped and peeling. The numbers on them faded almost to illegibility. I tried the nearest door, but the knob wouldn't budge. Same with the next one, and the next. All locked. As I moved deeper into the corridor, I became aware of sounds coming from behind the doors. Muffled voices, crying, and once, a scream that cut off abruptly. I quickened my pace, looking for any way out. The corridor seemed to go on forever, turning at odd angles that didn't make sense given the layout of our building. I must have walked the equivalent of several city blocks, all while staying on what should have been a single floor. Just as panic was starting to truly set in, I saw a figure ahead. Relief flooded through me. Another person. Maybe they could explain what was going on. "Hey," I called out, jogging towards them. "Excuse me, can you help me? I'm a bit lost." The figure turned, and my relief evaporated instantly. It was a man, or at least it had the shape of a man, but his proportions were all wrong, limbs too long, joints bending in impossible ways. And his face. It was like someone had tried to sculpt human features without ever having seen a real person. I backpedaled, my heart racing. The thing tilted its head, regarding me with eyes that were just empty sockets. Then it began to move towards me, its gait a jerky, unsettling thing. I ran, back the way I had come, no longer caring about finding an exit, just wanting to get away from that nightmarish figure. I could hear it behind me, its movements faster than should be possible given its awkward gait. As I ran, I became aware of more movement around me, shapes in my peripheral vision, darting between doors. The muffled sounds from behind the doors grew louder, more frenzied. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that twisted corridor. But eventually, mercifully, I saw the elevator ahead. I put on a final burst of speed, practically throwing myself at the doors. To my immense relief, they opened. I dove inside, frantically jabbing at the button for my floor. As the doors began to close, I caught a glimpse of the corridor beyond. It was filled with figures now, all shapes and sizes, all wrong in ways I couldn't quite process. They surged towards the elevator, a tide of nightmares. The doors slid shut just in time. I felt the elevator begin to move, and I sagged against the wall, gasping for breath. When the doors opened again, I was back on my floor. The familiar hallway, with its inoffensive beige walls and generic artwork, had never looked so beautiful. I stumbled to my apartment, locked the door behind me, and called in sick to work. I spent the day trying to convince myself that what I'd experienced wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something impossible existed in our building, a floor that defied logic and reason. And now that I knew about it, I couldn't unknow it. In the days that followed, I tried to find out more. I asked my neighbors if they'd ever experienced anything strange in the elevator. Most just gave me odd looks, but a few got a haunted look in their eyes, quickly changing the subject. I researched the history of the building, looking for any clues. What I found chilled me to the bone. Over the years, Dozens of people had gone missing from the Greystone. They were just gone. No traces, no explanations. Had they found that impossible floor? Were they still there, trapped behind those locked doors? I couldn't bring myself to move out. Where would I go? How could I live with myself, knowing what I knew and doing nothing? So I stayed, but I took the stairs. Every time, no matter how tired I was, no matter how many floors I had to climb, because I knew that somewhere in our building, that impossible floor was waiting. And if I was ever unlucky enough to find it again, I might not make it back. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear the elevator moving on its own, stopping at a floor that doesn't exist. And in my darkest moments, I wonder, is it only a matter of time before that floor finds me again? So if you ever find yourself in an elevator that opens onto a floor that shouldn't be there, take my advice. Don't step out, no matter what you see, no matter who tells you to. Because some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. And in the spaces between floors, in the cracks of reality we pretend don't exist, things are waiting. Hungry things, patient things, things that would love nothing more than to welcome you to your new home, on a floor that doesn't exist. The first time my reflection tried to warn me, I dismissed it as a trick of the light. By the third time, I realized I was caught in a terrifying game of cat and mouse with a version of myself desperate to change the future. If only I had listened sooner. It started on a Tuesday morning, as I was getting ready for work. I was running late, as usual, hurriedly brushing my teeth while mentally rehearsing my presentation for the day. That's when I saw it. A flicker of movement in the mirror that didn't quite match my own. I paused, toothbrush halfway to my mouth, and stared at my reflection. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw my mirror self shaking her head, a look of urgent warning in her eyes. But when I blinked, everything was normal again. I chalked it up to lack of sleep and too much caffeine. After all, I'd been pulling long hours at the office, preparing for this big presentation. It was natural to be a little jumpy, right? The day went by in a blur of meetings and last-minute preparations. By the time I got home that evening, I'd all but forgotten about the strange incident in the bathroom. It wasn't until 2 days later that it happened again. I was trying on outfits for a date, turning this way and that in front of my full-length mirror. As I reached for a different shirt, I caught sight of my reflection making a slashing motion across its throat, mouthing what looked like, "Don't go." I jerked back, heart racing. This time, I was sure I hadn't imagined it. But when I looked again, my reflection was behaving normally, mirroring my shocked expression. "Get a grip, Liz," I muttered to myself, running a shaky hand through my hair. "You're just nervous about the date." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Something was very, very wrong. I ended up canceling the date, too unsettled to go out. That night, I barely slept, jumping at every shadow and avoiding looking at any reflective surfaces. The third time it happened, there was no denying it. I was at work, washing my hands in the bathroom, when my reflection suddenly pressed its palms against the glass, its eyes wide with fear. "Listen to me," I saw it mouth urgently. "You're in danger." I stumbled backward, a scream caught in my throat. A coworker entering the bathroom gave me an odd look, but I barely noticed. I was too focused on the mirror, where my reflection was now back to normal, looking as terrified as I felt. That was the moment I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something impossible was happening, and if I didn't figure it out soon, I had a feeling I'd regret it. Over the next few days, I became hyper-aware of every reflective surface around me. Mirrors, windows, even the shiny surface of my phone. I scrutinized them all, waiting for another message from my other self. It didn't take long. Walking past a store window, I caught sight of my reflection gesturing frantically. I stopped, ignoring the confused looks from passers-by, and watched as Mirror Me pointed urgently at something behind me. I spun around, half expecting to see some imminent threat. but there was nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual bustle of the city street. When I turned back to the window, my reflection was pressing what looked like a scrap of paper against the glass. I squinted, trying to make out the hastily scrawled message, "Harris Building, 8 p.m. Stop it." The image faded quickly, leaving me staring at my own bewildered face in the window. The Harris Building, that was where my office was located. But what was happening at 8 p.m., and what was I supposed to stop? I spent the rest of the day in a state of nervous anticipation. As 8 p.m. approached, I found myself back at the office, pacing the empty corridors, jumping at every sound. At precisely 8 p.m., I heard a commotion from the floor above. Heart pounding, I raced up the stairs. I burst through the door to find two of my co-workers in what looked like a heated argument. One of them, Dave from accounting, had the other pinned against the wall. "Hey!" I shouted, startling them both. "What's going on here?" Dave released his grip, looking sheepish. "It's nothing, Liz. Just a misunderstanding about some numbers in the quarterly report." But I could see the fear in the other man's eyes, the way he rubbed his throat where Dave's arm had been. This was more than a simple disagreement. As security arrived to sort things out, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just prevented something much worse from happening. But how had my reflection known? From that point on, the warnings became more frequent and more specific. My reflection would appear at odd moments, desperately trying to communicate. Sometimes it was written messages, other times frantic gestures or mouthed words. Each time, the warnings led me to avert some kind of disaster. A car accident narrowly avoided. A fire caught before it could spread. Once I even prevented a mugging, all based on my reflection's cryptic clues. I began to understand that somehow, impossibly, my reflection was a version of me from the future. A version that had seen terrible things happen and was trying to change the course of events. But as grateful as I was for the warnings, the constant vigilance was taking its toll. I was barely sleeping, jumping at every reflective surface, constantly on edge waiting for the next message. My friends and family were starting to worry, noticing my erratic behavior and the dark circles under my eyes. Then came the warning that changed everything. I was at home, listlessly channel surfing, when my reflection appeared in the black screen of the turned-off laptop on my coffee table. It looked worse than I'd ever seen it. Hair disheveled, eyes wild with fear and exhaustion. "It's coming," my reflection mouthed, looking over its shoulder as if expecting something to pounce at any moment. "Can't stop it. Hide." Before I could react, the image vanished, leaving me staring at my own terrified face in the laptop screen. Hide? Hide from what? And what did it mean? It couldn't be stopped. For the next week, I was a nervous wreck. I called in sick to work, barricaded myself in my apartment, and waited for whatever apocalyptic event my future self had warned me about. But nothing happened. Days passed, and the world continued to turn. No disasters, no accidents, not even a stubbed toe. As the adrenaline wore off, doubt began to creep in. Had I imagined it all? Was this some kind of elaborate mental breakdown? Just as I was starting to think about seeing a therapist, I caught sight of my reflection in the bathroom mirror. But this time it wasn't trying to warn me, wasn't trying. It was smiling. A sad, tired smile, but a smile nonetheless. "Thank you," it mouthed. "It's over." And just like that, it was gone. My reflection went back to being just that. A reflection. I never saw another warning after that day. My life slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after everything I'd experienced. But I was changed. How could I not be? After weeks of averting disasters and changing the course of events, I found myself hyper-aware of the butterfly effect, how small actions could have huge consequences. I never knew exactly what catastrophe my future self had been trying to prevent. Maybe it was something big, a culmination of all the smaller events I'd changed. Or maybe it was something more personal, a tragedy that would have sent my life spiraling in a different direction. Whatever it was, I'm grateful. grateful to that other version of myself who fought so hard to change things, who broke the laws of physics to send warnings back through time. But sometimes, late at night, I find myself staring into mirrors, half expecting to see that frantic version of myself appear again. And I wonder, if I had to do it, if I had to find a way to send messages to my past self, would I be strong enough, clever enough, determined enough? I hope I never have to find out. But if I do, if someday I find myself on the other side of the mirror, desperately trying to change the past, well, at least I know one thing. I'll listen. So if you ever catch your reflection moving independently, if you ever see yourself trying to tell you something, pay attention. It might just save your life, or someone else's, or maybe, just maybe, the entire world. Because sometimes, the most important warnings come from the last place you'd expect. Yourself. The old bed and breakfast looked quaint and inviting as we pulled up, but I should have known better. In a place where guests check in but never check out, we were about to discover the true meaning of permanent residence. It was supposed to be a fun family road trip, a chance for Sarah and me to bond with our kids, Jake and Lily, away from the distractions of modern life. We'd been driving for hours, the kids getting crankier by the minute, when we saw the sign, Willow Creek BB, next exit. What do you say we call it a night? I asked Sarah, who nodded wearily from the passenger seat. The GPS led us down a winding country road, deeper into the woods than I'd expected. Just as I was starting to wonder if we'd made a wrong turn, the trees parted to reveal a large Victorian house, its white paint gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Wow, Jake breathed from the back seat. It looks like something out of a movie. As we pulled into the gravel driveway, an elderly woman emerged from the front door, her silver hair caught up in a neat bun. She smiled warmly as we got out of the car, stretching our stiff limbs. "Welcome to Willow Creek," she said, her voice as warm and inviting as fresh-baked cookies. "I'm Martha. You must be the Thompsons." I blinked in surprise. "Yes, but how did you know?" Martha's smile widened. "Oh, we don't get many visitors out this way. I just assumed. Now, let's get you folks settled in." As we followed Martha inside, I couldn't shake a niggling feeling of unease. How had she known we were coming? We hadn't made a reservation. This was a spur-of-the-moment decision. The interior of the BB was like stepping back in time. Antique furniture, floral wallpaper, and the smell of cinnamon and old books. It was charming, in an old-fashioned way, but something about it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Martha showed us to our rooms, a master bedroom for Sarah and me, and a smaller room with twin beds for the kids. As we were getting settled, I heard other guests moving around, muffled voices and footsteps from the other rooms. "Sounds like we're not the only ones here," I remarked to Sarah as we unpacked. She nodded, but her brow was furrowed. "Did you notice him, though? We didn't see any other cars in the driveway." I paused, realizing she was right. Before I could dwell on it, Martha's voice floated up from downstairs, announcing that dinner was ready. The dining room was set for a feast, far more food than I would have expected for a small BB. Several other guests were already seated, an elderly couple, a middle-aged man dining alone, and a young couple about our age. As we ate, I tried to make small talk with the other guests, but their responses were oddly vague. They couldn't seem to remember where they were from or how long they'd been staying at Willow Creek. The elderly couple just smiled blankly when I asked, while the middle-aged man muttered something about losing track of time. The young couple, Tom and Amy, were the most talkative, but even their answers seemed rehearsed, as if they were reciting lines from a script. When I asked what had brought them to Willow Creek, Tom's eyes glazed over for a moment before he replied, "Oh, just passing through." After dinner, Sarah and I tucked the kids into bed. Jake was out like a light, but Lily seemed unsettled. "Daddy," she whispered as I was about to turn off the light. I don't like it here. The people are weird. I forced a smile, trying to hide my own growing unease. It's just because we're tired, sweetie. Everything will look better in the morning. But as I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lily was right. There was something off about this place, about the other guests. It was like they were not quite there. In the middle of the night, I woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Careful not to wake Sarah, I crept to the door and peered out. I saw Martha gliding down the hall, stopping at each door and listening. She pressed her ear to each door in turn, nodding to herself before moving on. When she reached our door, I quickly stepped back, my heart pounding. I heard her pause outside, and for a terrifying moment, I thought she might come in. But after what seemed like an eternity, she moved on. The next morning, I was determined to get some answers. But as we came down for breakfast, I was shocked to see that all the guests from the night before were gone. In their place were new faces, a family with 3 kids, an older woman traveling alone, and a pair of newlyweds. "Where did everyone go?" I asked Martha as she served us pancakes. She looked at me quizzically. "I'm not sure what you mean, dear. These folks checked in late last night." I opened my mouth to argue, to insist that these weren't the people we'd had dinner with, but Sarah kicked me under the table, shaking her head slightly. I got the message. Don't make a scene in front of the kids. After breakfast, I made an excuse about checking on the car and pulled Sarah aside outside. "Something's not right here," I hissed. "The guests have changed, Martha's lying, and did you see how she was creeping around last night?" Sarah bit her lip, looking worried. "I know. I've been feeling it too. We need to leave, John. Now." We hurried back inside to pack, but as we entered the foyer, we found Martha blocking the stairs. "Leaving so soon?" she asked, her voice still warm but with an undercurrent of something else. Threat? Warning? "But you've only just arrived, and we have so much planned for your stay." "I'm sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But we really need to get back on the road." Martha's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "I'm afraid that's not possible. You see, once you check into Willow Creek, you don't check out." As if on cue, the other guests appeared, surrounding us. Their faces were blank, eyes vacant. With a jolt of horror, I realized they weren't breathing. "What are you?" Sarah whispered, clutching my arm. Martha's form seemed to flicker, like a bad TV signal. For a moment, I saw something else beneath her grandmotherly exterior, something ancient and hungry. "We are the caretakers," she said, her voice now a chorus of whispers. "This place, it needs to be fed, and you, my dears, are the perfect feast." I didn't wait to hear more. Grabbing Sarah's hand, I yelled for the kids and made a break for the door. But as we burst out into the sunlight, my heart sank. The driveway was gone, replaced by an endless expanse of misty forest. We ran anyway, plunging into the trees, the sound of pursuit close behind. But no matter how far we ran, we couldn't escape. The forest looped back on itself, always bringing us back to the BB. After what felt like hours, we collapsed on the front lawn, exhausted and terrified. Martha and the other guests stood on the porch, watching us with patient, hungry eyes. "You can't leave," Martha said gently. "But don't worry, you'll get used to it. Everyone does, eventually." As I looked at my family, at Sarah's tear-streaked face, at Jake and Lily huddled together in fear, I knew we were trapped. We had checked in to Willow Creek BB, and like all the others before us, we would never check out. Now, as I write this, I don't know how long we've been here. Time doesn't work right in this place. We've watched countless families come and go, seen them slowly fade into the background, becoming part of the house, part of the hunger. I know that soon we'll be like the others, vacant-eyed, endlessly repeating the same routines, waiting for the next unsuspecting guests to arrive. But for now, while I still remember who I am, I'm leaving this warning. If you're ever on a long road trip and you see a sign for Willow Creek BB, keep driving. No matter how tired you are, no matter how quaint and inviting it looks, don't stop. Because once you check in, you'll never leave. And somewhere in that endless misty forest, we'll be waiting, watching, hungry for new guests to join us in our eternal stay at Willow Creek. The chanting started at exactly 3:33 a.m., a low, guttural sound that seemed to vibrate through the walls of our dorm room. I thought my new roommate was just weird at first, but as the days went by, I realized I was living with something far more sinister than a quirky college student. It was my first semester at Evergreen State University, and I was both excited and nervous about the whole college experience. When I arrived at my assigned dorm room, my roommate, Tyler, was already there, unpacking his things. He seemed nice enough at first, quiet, a bit intense maybe, but polite. "Hey, I'm Mark," I said, extending my hand. Tyler shook it, his grip surprisingly firm. "Tyler," he replied, his dark eyes studying me with an intensity that made me slightly uncomfortable. As we settled into college life, I noticed some odd things about Tyler. He kept strange hours, often staying up late into the night hunched over his desk, scribbling in a notebook I never got a good look at. He had an unusual collection of books, old, leather-bound volumes with titles in languages I didn't recognize. But hey, it was college, right? Everyone was a little weird, finding themselves and all that. I tried not to judge. It was about 3 weeks into the semester when the chanting started. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of Tyler's voice, low and rhythmic, speaking words I couldn't understand. When I sat up and turned on my lamp, he stopped abruptly, looking at me with those intense eyes. "Sorry," he said, his voice hoarse. "Did I wake you? I was just practicing for my linguistics class." I nodded, too groggy and confused to argue, and went back to sleep. But it happened again the next night, and the next. Always at 3:33 a.m., always the same guttural chanting. I started to dread going to sleep, knowing I'd be woken by those eerie sounds. I tried talking to Tyler about it, but he always brushed it off with vague excuses. Linguistics practice, meditation, even sleep talking. He had an explanation for everything. But as the weeks went on, stranger things began to happen. Objects in our room would move on their own when Tyler was out. I'd come back from class to find my textbooks rearranged, or my laptop open to websites I'd never visited, full of symbols and text I couldn't read. One night, I woke up to find Tyler standing over my bed, staring at me with eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. When I gasped and sat up, he blinked and the glow was gone. "Sorry," he mumbled. "Sleepwalking." I didn't believe him, but what could I say? That I thought my roommate was some kind of demon. I started spending less time in the room, hanging out in the library or at friends' places until late at night. But no matter how late I came back, Tyler would be awake, scribbling in that notebook or reading those strange books. About 2 months into the semester, things escalated. I woke up one night to the usual chanting, but this time it was louder, more frenzied. I opened my eyes to see Tyler standing in the center of the room, arms raised, that notebook open on the floor in front of him. The air in the room felt thick, charged with some kind of energy I couldn't explain. As Tyler chanted, the pages of the notebook began to turn on their own, faster and faster. "Tyler!" I shouted, panic rising in my throat. "What the hell are you doing?" He turned to look at me, and I saw that his eyes were completely black, no whites visible at all. When he spoke, his voice was deeper, resonating in a way that made my teeth ache. "The doorway is opening," he said, grinning. "They're coming through." Before I could respond, a wind whipped up in the room, scattering papers and knocking books off shelves. In the center of the whirlwind, just above the notebook, the air seemed to ripple and tear. Through that tear, I saw Something. Shapes that hurt my eyes to look at directly, moving in ways that shouldn't be possible. I heard sounds that no human throat could make, saw colors that shouldn't exist. I scrambled out of bed, pressing myself against the wall, as far from that impossible tear in reality as I could get. "Tyler, stop!" I screamed, but my voice was lost in the howling wind and the otherworldly sounds coming from the rift. Tyler turned to me, his face split in a manic grin. "It's too late to stop it," he said, his voice still that deep, unnatural tone. "They're here, and they're hungry." As he spoke, something began to emerge from the rift. A limb, if you could call it that. A writhing mass of tentacles and eyes and mouths, all shifting and changing in nauseating ways. In that moment, blind panic took over. I didn't think. I just acted. I lunged forward, grabbed Tyler's weird notebook, and threw it across the room. It hit the window, knocking it open, and a gust of cool night air rushed in. The effect was immediate. The rift seemed to waver, the thing trying to come through it recoiling as if burned by the night air. Tyler screamed, a sound of fury and frustration that was barely human. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran, out of the room, down the hallway, not stopping until I was outside the dorm building, gasping for breath in the cool night air. When campus security arrived, drawn by the commotion, they found our room in chaos, papers everywhere, furniture overturned, that strange notebook smoking slightly where it had landed by the open window. But Tyler was gone. In the days that followed, as the police investigated and the university tried to make sense of what had happened, I struggled to come to terms with what I'd seen. No one believed my story about rifts in reality and otherworldly creatures. They assumed Tyler had some kind of psychotic break, maybe was on drugs. But I knew the truth. I'd seen it with my own eyes, heard it with my own ears. Something had almost come through into our world that night. Something ancient and hungry and utterly alien. I switched dorms after that, then switched schools entirely the next semester. I couldn't bear to be in that place anymore. Couldn't shake the feeling that thin spots remained in the fabric of reality there, that things might still be trying to push through. Years have passed, and I've tried to put that night behind me. But sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I find myself checking the clock. And if it's 3:33 a.m., I lie awake, straining my ears for the sound of chanting. Because I know now that there are things out there, things that exist in the spaces between what we know and what we fear. Things that are always looking for a way in. And sometimes, all it takes is one person, one ritual, one moment of weakness, to open a door that should stay forever closed. So if you ever find yourself with a roommate who keeps odd hours, who chants in languages you don't understand, who has books that make your eyes hurt to look at, be careful. Be very, very careful. Because you might just be living with someone who's trying to invite something into our world that should never, ever be here. And once that door is opened, there's no telling what might come through, or if we'll ever be able to close it again. The photograph was impossible. Me, standing in a place I'd never been, with people I'd never met. But as more of these impossible photos appeared, each dated in the future, I realized I was caught in a nightmare where my fate was already sealed, and time itself was unraveling around me. It started on a Tuesday, a day that began like any other. I was sorting through my mail, tossing junk into the recycling bin, when I came across a plain white envelope with no return address. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. At first glance, it seemed like a typical tourist snapshot, a group of people smiling in front of the Eiffel Tower. But as I looked closer, my blood ran cold. There, in the center of the group, was me. I stared at the photo, my mind reeling. I'd never been to Paris. I'd never met any of the people in the picture. And yet, there I was, clear as day, smiling at the camera as if I didn't have a care in the world. Flipping the photo over, I saw a date written in neat handwriting. June 15th, 2024. 6 months in the future. I sat down hard, the photo trembling in my hands. This had to be some kind of mistake, right? A prank, maybe, or a really good Photoshop job. But the longer I looked at it, the more certain I became. That was me in the photo, and somehow, impossibly, it was a glimpse into my future. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, unable to focus on work, constantly pulling out the photo to examine it again. By the time I went to bed that night, I had convinced myself it was all an elaborate hoax. I tucked the photo into my bedside drawer, determined to forget about it. But the next morning, there was another envelope waiting for me. This photo showed me at what looked like a wedding. I was dressed in a suit, raising a glass and a toast. The bride and groom were strangers to me, but again, there I was, as real as could be. The date on the back, August 3rd, 2024. Over the next week, more photos arrived. Me at a beach I didn't recognize. Me in a hospital waiting room, looking worried. Me at a funeral, tears streaming down my face. Each photo was dated, each one further into the future. I became obsessed, poring over every detail of the photos, trying to glean any information I could about this apparent future. I searched online for the locations, the faces of the strangers who seemed to know me, but I found nothing concrete, just more questions. As the photos kept coming, I started to notice changes in myself. The me in the later photos looked different, thinner, with a haunted look in my eyes. In the last photo I received, dated December 31st, 2024, I barely recognized myself. I looked gaunt, my eyes sunken, standing alone on what looked like a cliff edge, staring out at a stormy sea. That photo terrified me more than all the others combined. What had happened to me in the course of a year to change me so dramatically? I stopped going to work, stopped answering calls from friends and family. I became a hermit, surrounded by these glimpses of a future I didn't understand and couldn't control. I taped the photos to my walls in chronological order, creating a timeline of a year that hadn't happened yet. As I stared at this visual representation of my apparent future, I began to notice patterns. Certain faces appeared multiple times, locations repeated. It was as if I was looking at puzzle pieces of my life, but I couldn't figure out how they fit together. Then, one day, no new photo arrived. I waited anxiously, checking my mailbox every hour, but nothing came. The next day, still nothing. As days turned into weeks with no new photos, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. Was it over? Or was something worse coming? It was a month after the last photo arrived that things took an even stranger turn. I was at the grocery store, my first time out of the house in weeks, when I saw her. A woman from the photos, the one who had been at the wedding and appeared in several other shots. She was examining a display of apples, looking exactly as she had in the photos, my heart pounding. I approached her. "Excuse me," I said, my voice shaky. "This is going to sound strange, but do I know you?" She looked at me, confusion clear on her face. "I'm sorry. I don't think so. Are you sure you're not mistaking me for someone else?" I fumbled for my phone, where I'd saved copies of all the photos. "Look," I said, showing her the wedding picture. "That's you, right? And that's me. But I've never met you before. And this wedding hasn't happened yet." The woman's eyes widened as she looked at the photo. That is me," she said slowly. "But I don't understand. I'm not engaged. I've never seen you before in my life. How is this possible?" Before I could respond, a man walked up to us. With a jolt, I recognized him too. He was in several of the later photos, including the final one on the cliff. "Sarah, is everything okay?" he asked, looking between us with concern. Sarah, I finally had a name for her, showed him the photo on my phone. His reaction mirrored hers: shock, disbelief, and a growing fear. "Who are you?" he demanded. What is this? I tried to explain about the photos, about how they'd been arriving for weeks, showing a future I didn't understand. As I spoke, I could see the disbelief on their faces turning to something else. Fear, anger, I couldn't quite tell. Look, I said desperately, I know how this sounds, but you're in these photos. Multiple photos. Something is going to happen. Something that brings us all together. And I don't know what it is or how to stop it. Sarah and the man exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. Then, to my surprise, Sarah pulled out her own phone. "We need to show you something too," she said, her voice tight. She pulled up a photo on her phone and showed it to me. It was a picture of her and the man, standing in front of a "Welcome to Paris" sign. And there, in the background, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, was me. "This was taken 2 years ago," Sarah said. "We didn't notice you in the background until recently, but we've never met you before today." My mind reeled. How could I be in their past when they were in my future? It didn't make sense. None of this made sense. As we stood there in the grocery store, surrounded by the mundane normalcy of shoppers going about their day, I felt reality shift around me. The certainty I'd had about my life, about time itself, crumbled away. In that moment, I understood that the photos weren't just glimpses of the future. They were evidence of something much bigger, much stranger. Time wasn't a straight line. It was a web, a tangle of possibilities and paradoxes. And somehow, I was caught in the middle of it. Sarah, the man whose name I learned was David, and I left the store together. We spent hours talking, comparing notes, trying to make sense of our impossible situation. But the more we talked, the more complex it became. It wasn't just the three of us. There were others in the photos, other lives entangled in this temporal mess. As night fell, we made a decision. We would find the others. We would piece together this puzzle, no matter where or when it took us. Because one thing was clear. The future in those photos, my gaunt, haunted future self on that cliff, was a warning. Something was coming. Something big. And somehow, we were at the center of it. I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know if we can change the future shown in those photos, or if by trying to change it, we'll only ensure it happens. But I do know this. Time is not what we thought it was. Reality is more fragile, more malleable than we ever imagined. And somewhere out there, our future selves are taking photos, sending them back, trying to warn us, or guide us, or maybe, just maybe, asking for our help. So if you ever receive a photo of yourself in a place you've never been, with people you've never met, pay attention. It might not just be a glimpse of your future. It might be the beginning of an unraveling, a cascade of cause and effect that spans time itself. Because in a world where time is broken, where the future can influence the past, anything is possible. And the only way forward might just be to embrace the impossible. The scream echoed through the forest, freezing my blood and stopping me in my tracks. As a park ranger, I'd heard plenty of animal calls. But this was something else entirely. Little did I know. That unearthly sound was just the beginning of a nightmare that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the wilderness I called home. My name's Jack, and I've been a ranger at Blackwood National Park for going on 15 years now. I thought I knew every inch of these woods, every creature that called them home. But that night, I realized how wrong I was. It started as a routine patrol. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples as I made my final rounds before heading back to the ranger station. That's when I heard it, a scream that sounded almost human, but with an otherworldly quality that sent chills down my spine. I radioed it in, thinking maybe some hiker had gotten themselves into trouble. "This is Ranger Collins. I've heard what sounds like a person in distress near Coyote Ridge. I'm going to investigate." "Copy that, Jack," came the crackly reply, "Be careful out there, storms rolling in." I looked up, noticing for the first time the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. Great, just what I needed. As I made my way towards the source of the sound, the forest seemed to close in around me. The usual nighttime noises, chirping crickets, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, had gone silent. It was as if the whole forest was holding its breath. I found the first sign that something was wrong about a quarter-mile from where I'd heard the scream. It was a campsite, but one like I'd never seen before. The tent was shredded, sleeping bags and supplies scattered everywhere. But it was the strange symbols carved into the trees surrounding the camp that really got to me. They looked ancient, alien almost, glowing faintly in the dying light. "Hello?" I called out, my hand resting on the butt of my sidearm. "Park Ranger, is anyone here?" No response, just the growing rumble of thunder in the distance. As I examined the campsite, my flashlight beam caught something that made my stomach turn. Blood, a lot of it, soaking into the forest floor. But there was no body, no sign of where it had come from. I was about to radio in again when I saw it, a figure at the edge of my flashlight's beam. For a split second, I thought it was a bear standing on its hind legs. But as it turned to face me, I realized how wrong I was. It was tall, easily 7 feet, with limbs that were just a bit too long, joints that bent in ways they shouldn't. Its skin was a patchwork of fur and scales, and its face, God, its face was like something out of a nightmare. Multiple eyes, all glowing with an inner light, and a mouthful of teeth that would put a shark to shame. I stood there, paralyzed with fear, as the thing cocked its head, regarding me with what seemed like curiosity. Then it spoke, its voice a guttural growl that somehow formed words. "You shouldn't be here, guardian of the trees," it said. "The veil is thin tonight. The old ones stir." Before I could react, it turned and loped off into the forest, moving with a speed and grace that shouldn't have been possible for something its size. I don't know how long I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. It was the crackle of my radio that finally snapped me out of it. Jack, come in. Did you find anything?" I raised the radio to my mouth with a shaking hand. I'm not sure. There's a campsite here. Looks like there was some kind of attack. And I saw something. I can't explain it. I need backup." "Copy that. We're sending a team your way. Stay put." Stay put. Right. As if I could move even if I wanted to. The storm hit then, rain coming down in sheets. Lightning illuminated the forest in brief. Strobe-like flashes. And in those flashes, I saw them. More creatures, similar to the first but each unique in its own horrifying way. They moved through the trees with preternatural speed and grace, their glowing eyes fixed on me. I don't know what made me do it, but I ran. Away from the campsite, away from the road, deeper into the forest. I could hear them behind me, their inhuman shrieks mixing with the thunder. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like they were on fire. But no matter how fast I went, I could feel them getting closer. Just when I thought it was over, that I couldn't run another step, I burst into a clearing. In the center stood a massive oak tree, larger than any I'd ever seen in the park. Its trunk was covered in the same strange symbols I'd seen at the campsite, but these were glowing brightly, pulsing with an inner light. As I stumbled towards the tree, I heard the creatures enter the clearing behind me, but they stopped at the edge, as if held back by some invisible barrier. "The Guardian has found the anchor," one of them growled. "The game changes." I pressed my back against the tree, feeling a strange warmth emanating from it. The creatures paced at the edge of the clearing, their glowing eyes never leaving me. "What are you?" I managed to ask, my voice hoarse from running. "What do you want?" The largest of the creatures, the one I'd first encountered, stepped forward. "We are the in-between," it said, "neither here nor there. We walk the spaces between your world and others. But why are you here? Why now?" The veil thins, it replied. The old magics weaken. We seek passage. As it spoke, I became aware of a change in the air. The storm had intensified, the wind whipping through the trees with unnatural force, and in the sky above the clearing, I saw something. A tear, like reality itself, was coming apart at the seams. Through it, I caught glimpses of other places, other worlds that hurt my mind to look at directly. You must choose a guardian, the creature said. Open the way or close it forever. But know this, the choice is not without cost. I looked at the tear in the sky, growing larger by the second. At the creatures, watching me with hungry anticipation. At the tree at my back, its symbols pulsing in time with my racing heart. In that moment, I understood. I don't know how, but I knew what I had to do. I placed my hand on the tree, feeling a surge of energy course through me. The symbols on the trunk began to glow brighter, spreading up into the branches. I'm sorry, I said, though I'm not sure to whom, but this isn't your world to enter. Power flowed through me, more than I thought possible. I felt connected to every tree in the forest, every blade of grass, every living thing. And with that connection came knowledge, ancient, primal knowledge of the true nature of the world. I pushed that power outward, towards the tear in the sky. I could feel the resistance, the other side pushing back, trying to force its way through. But I was the guardian, the protector of this place, and I would not let it fall. With a sound like reality itself tearing, the rift closed. The creatures howled in fury and despair, their forms already beginning to fade. You've doomed us, Guardian, the leader snarled, and yourself. As they disappeared, I felt the power draining from me. I slumped against the tree, utterly exhausted. The storm began to subside, the unnatural wind dying down to a gentle breeze. I don't know how long I sat there, trying to process what had happened. When my team finally found me, I was barely conscious. They told me later that I'd been missing for 3 days, though it had felt like only hours to me. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words sounded crazy even to my own ears. In the end, I said I'd gotten lost in the storm, that I must have hit my head or something. But I know the truth. I know what I saw, what I did. And I know that the forest I've spent my life protecting is more than it seems. There are old magics here, ancient forces that most people can't even begin to comprehend. Now, as I walk my patrols, I see things differently. I notice the symbols carved into certain trees, invisible unless you know to look for them. I feel the pulse of energy running through the earth beneath my feet. And sometimes, on nights when the moon is full and the wind whispers secrets through the leaves, I catch glimpses of other worlds in the shadows between the trees. I am the guardian now, the protector of not just this forest, but of the barrier between worlds. It's a responsibility I never asked for, but one I'll bear for as long as I'm able. So if you ever find yourself in Blackwood National Park, and you hear a strange sound in the night, or see something move in the corner of your eye that doesn't quite make sense, well, don't worry. I'm out there, watching, protecting, but maybe stick to the marked trails, just to be safe. Because in these woods, the line between our world and others isn't as solid as you might think. And sometimes, things slip through the cracks. The security camera footage showed a customer who appeared in different aisles simultaneously, but was never seen at the checkout. As I rewound and replayed the tape for the 100th time, I realized I was dealing with something far beyond mere shoplifting. Little did I know, this impossible customer was about to drag me into a nightmare that defied the laws of physics and sanity alike. My name's Mike, and I've been working the night shift at Quick Mart for about 3 years now. It's not the most exciting job in the world, but it pays the bills. Most nights, it's just me, the hum of the fluorescent lights, and the occasional late-night customer looking for cigarettes or a quick snack. That all changed about a week ago. I was doing my usual nightly routine, Restocking shelves, checking expiration dates, the usual mundane tasks that keep me occupied during the long, quiet hours. Around 2 a.m., the bell above the door chimed, signaling a customer. I glanced up, expecting to see one of our regulars, maybe Jack, the insomniac writer who often came in for coffee, or Sarah, the ER nurse grabbing energy drinks before her shift. But this was someone I'd never seen before. He was an unremarkable-looking man, middle-aged, with graying hair and a forgettable face. The kind of person you could pass on the street 100 times and never remember. He nodded politely at me and headed towards the back of the store. I went back to my tasks, keeping half an eye on him as I always do with customers. That's when I noticed something odd. I could have sworn I saw him in the snack aisle, but a second later, he was over by the drinks cooler. I blinked, thinking I must be more tired than I realized, but it kept happening. The man seemed to be everywhere in the store at once, appearing in one aisle and then another almost instantaneously, yet he never approached the checkout. After about 20 minutes of this, I decided to intervene. "Excuse me, sir," I called out. "Can I help you find anything?" There was no response. I walked down the aisle where I'd last seen him, but it was empty. In fact, the entire store was empty. The man had vanished, shaken. I went to check the security footage. What I saw made my blood run cold. The cameras showed the man entering the store, just as I remembered. But then things got weird. He appeared in multiple cameras simultaneously, in different parts of the store, and in none of the footage did he ever leave. I must have watched those tapes a dozen times that night, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. By the time my shift ended, I was convinced I was losing my mind. The next night, it happened again. The same man, the same impossible movements. This time, I was determined to confront him. I waited until he appeared in the aisle nearest to me, then quickly stepped around the corner. "Sir, I need to talk to you about..." I stopped short. The aisle was empty. "Looking for me?" a voice said behind me. I spun around. There he was, standing calmly as if he'd been there all along. "Who are you?" I demanded. "What are you doing?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just browsing, Mike. Isn't that what customers do?" The fact that he knew my name sent a chill down my spine. I hadn't worn my name tag in months. "You're not just browsing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've seen the camera footage. You're everywhere at once." "It's impossible." He chuckled, a sound that made my skin crawl. Impossible is such a limiting word, don't you think? I prefer improbable. As he spoke, I blinked, and suddenly he was at the end of the aisle. I hadn't seen him move. It was as if he had teleported. "What are you?" I whispered. "I'm a customer, Mike. Just a customer who exists, differently than you're used to." Over the next hour, I tried to make sense of what was happening. The man, if you could call him that, explained in vague, often contradictory terms. He talked about temporal displacement and quantum superposition, like they were everyday concepts. Most of it went over my head, but I gathered that he experienced time and space differently than normal people. "But why here?" I asked. "Why this store?" He shrugged, a gesture that seemed too human for whatever he was. "It's a nexus point, a place where the fabric of reality is thin. Surely you've noticed strange things happening here before." And the thing was, I had items that disappeared and reappeared in impossible places, the clock that sometimes ran backwards, the customers who came in looking one age and left looking decades older or younger. I'd always dismissed these things, convinced I was imagining them. But now, "What do you want?" I finally asked. His expression turned serious. "I want to go home, Mike, but I'm stuck, caught between moments, between realities. I need your help." "My help? What can I possibly do?" He explained that the store's security system was somehow interfering with his ability to shift properly. If I could turn it off just for a moment, he might be able to break free of whatever was holding him here. I was skeptical, to say the least. But as the night wore on, and I watched him appear and disappear around the store, moving in ways that defied physics, I began to consider it. What if he was telling the truth? What if I could help him? Finally, as dawn approached, I made my decision. I went to the back office and disabled the security system. The cameras went dark. The electronic locks disengaged. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air in the store began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. The man appeared in front of me, his form flickering and distorting. "Thank you, Mike," he said, his voice echoing strangely. "But I'm afraid I haven't been entirely truthful with you." Before I could react, he reached out and grabbed my arm. The world seemed to twist and warp around us. I felt a sensation like I was being stretched and compressed at the same time. When the feeling passed, I found myself elsewhere. It looked like the Quick Mart, but wrong somehow. The colors were off, the proportions slightly skewed, and outside the windows, instead of the familiar parking lot, I saw a swirling void of impossible colors. "Welcome to my world, Mike," the man said, but his voice came from everywhere at once. Or should I say worlds? You see, I wasn't trapped in your reality. I was scouting it. And now, thanks to you, we can begin the invasion. As he spoke, I saw other figures appearing in the store. Dozens, then hundreds of them, all with that same forgettable face. They began to flicker and disappear, and I knew with a sickening certainty that they were heading to my world. "Why?" I managed to ask. "And why are you doing this?" The man, the thing, smiled that empty smile again. "Because we can, Mike. Because your reality is undefended, ripe for the taking. And because, well, we're hungry. I tried to run, but in this place, physics didn't work the way I was used to. Each step sent me spiraling in a different direction. I was lost in a maze of my own store, each aisle leading to another impossible version of itself. I don't know how long I've been trapped here. Time doesn't work right in this place. I catch glimpses sometimes through the windows of my own world. I see the Quick Mart, still operating as if nothing has changed. But I know better. I see the customers coming and going, and I wonder how many of them are real, and how many are these invaders, these reality-bending horrors wearing human faces. And I wonder, with a growing sense of dread, how long it will be before they drop their disguises entirely, before they remake my world in the image of this twisted, impossible place. So, if you're reading this, be careful the next time you're in a convenience store late at night. Pay attention to the other customers. And if you see someone who seems to be everywhere at once, someone whose movements don't quite make sense, run, and don't look back. Because the invasion has already begun, and it started in a little store called Quick Mart, on a night when a foolish clerk named Mike made a terrible, terrible mistake. And whatever you do, don't turn off the cameras. They might be the only thing keeping the horrors at bay. For now,